The night campaign, door to door, nonstop. He doesn't, he says unless you hit every door at least 5 times,
Good to go?
it's not even to go.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Ordinance Committee to order, it being October 24th at 6:32. With me, I have Councilor Lopez, Councilor Jourdain, I'm Linda Bacon, Chair of the committee, and Councilor Bartley. So I've had a request.
And Counselor Sullivan.
Councilor Sullivan has joined us in the chambers. I have had a request to take item 4 out of order with the assurance that it will
5
take
minutes.
5 minutes.
Thank you.
So I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, motion to suspend the rules to go to item 4.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Oh, good,
Okay.
good to see Jeff with us.
So proceeding to item 4, filed by Councilor Sullivan and Jourdain.
As long as my 5 minutes aren't counted against anything Jeff would say, so it's Jeff plus 5 minutes. Okay, good. So Michael and
Can I read the order?
oh, sorry.
Thanks. That a complete review of Chapter 42, Fire Prevention and Protection, be undertaken. Many sections are outdated or need to be reviewed and updated. Some sections are being ignored or circumvented. Article 3, which deals with the actual composition, staffing, and benefits of the department, is vague at best and receives less attention than the sale of cigarette lighters as detailed in 42-19. So that's just making a comparison, how sometimes we have great detail and other times not so much. So thank you for coming down tonight. And Councilor Jourdain, do you wish to speak to the order first?
Yeah, just very briefly, because I know I'm on the clock.
You are on the clock.
This is a comprehensive order, with primary credit going to Michael Sullivan. I'm only tangentially helping him, well, I'll help him as much as he wants, but to give the history of some of these items that I've been around longer than he has. But basically, this ordinance has been there. It speaks to the structure of the fire department, a lot of the who, what, wheres as to how the fire department operates. The question is, are we really following it? Probably not. It speaks to the numbers in the department. It speaks a lot of this type of thing needs to be revisited. The question now is, for tonight, procedure. How should we move forward to get to the answer that where we need to be on a rewrite of this ordinance? Thinking fire chief, thinking fire commission, thinking good folks like yourself, thinking union leadership, to invite them into with the graces of the chair to a future meeting, and how we would like to procedurally begin to chip away at this so that we can give something to the law department to do as a rewrite of the ordinance and bring it up to snuff, so if we don't say, there's 1 million firefighters in the ordinance, when in fact these categories might be 90, or, whatever those numbers are gonna be. We shouldn't say we shall have X number of firefighters unless we're going to actually have X number of firefighters, that type of thing. So I'll turn it over from there, but mostly I just wanted to have a minute on process, and then we could at some point retable this item and kind of begin to put this together.
Okay. Thanks.
Sullivan.
Okay. I think Kevin's covered the nature of the reason I filed all this. I've given it a little more thought since the last meeting. I would like to see a group of people called in so we can go through this. I really think we should go through each section here one by one and say, okay, this is still relevant, this is still good. It's exactly the way it should be. Check it off, that stays the same. This needs to be tweaked. This needs to be changed altogether. And it's not just to have it's to have an active discussion around the entire chapter. The one thing I would like to suggest is, as far as the union leadership, I've taken the liberty to go ahead and talk with the vice president of the union, and if this is acceptable with the committee, I'd like to see the vice president of the union represent the union for several reasons. Number one is he is a resident of Holyoke, and the union president is not. And this is by no means any reflection on the president of the union himself personally. It's just, this is a fact. This is one of the touchy subjects, is residency, and I think we're better off not it doesn't put him in a bad light or his opinion in any question if we have someone that is a resident representing there. Also, you know, unfortunately, right now, the president is embroiled in other issues within the fire department, and it just leaves all of that off the table. And I think we have a very fair person in the vice president, very capable of representing the union there. And it's not just the staffing, which has been a big subject over the last 6 months or year, but, you know, everything throughout the entire the chapter, even right down to the fees that are charged. Are they being charged? Where are they going? Are they still relevant? I think I touched briefly on this, but, you know, we have a whole page and a half of fees for different storage of flammables in the city. I think they're incredibly low given the nature of what they're allowed. I mean, I was staggered to see that you could store 1.6 million gallons of fuel in Holyoke for $200. I mean, you know, I think all of this needs to be looked at, and especially, you know, some of the other stuff, the charter issues involved, the composition and the way we go about having a fire commission. I know that's a lot more work, and it's outside of the ordinance, but it's something we can discuss here, and then if we need to move on to it through charters and rules or something else like that and field it off and get another motion in place, but at least have a discussion around it, how it's working or how it's not working and what needs to be done to improve it.
Thank you.
Hope I didn't use up everybody's 5 minutes.
I think there's 2 left. No. Welcome, Captain. And I don't want to fracture your name, so.
Jeff Preskopowski.
Okay. Thank you for coming down.
Yep.
Chief said he couldn't make it. We're happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
And I understood that you wanted to just make some general feedback to.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me down, first off. Second, I agree with all of you that this ordinance needs to be looked at. It's needed to be looked at for a long time. Many of the items in here from the city ordinances from 1972. So it really hasn't been looked at in a long time. I will say that the fire department has been in here numerous years trying to redo the fee schedules and things like that to no avail, but we've been trying. Okay. The composition of the fire department, this has been in here since 1972. These numbers have not changed. It just hasn't been looked at for whatever reason. It just hasn't been looked at. I am all in favor. I think Chief Pond is all in favor of putting a committee together to look at this. Whatever way you want to do it. Many things in here are contractual. Many things are outdated. So when it talks about vacation time and things like that, those are all contractual obligations now. When this was written, it wasn't. So things need to be thought out like that. We need to put a committee together that can make decisions that can make decisions contractually, which will take negotiations. You need to have people, decision makers within the department that, need to look at these things operationally. So it's not going to be an easy endeavor.
Well, just to help to frame it a little bit, what we'll be looking to do with the ordinance is to recreate it, if you will, and update it so that we can reference current events properly in it, instead of trying to state concrete fixed things like numbers. I think as an approach, we're looking for it to be something that can be reflective of what then is created through proper negotiations that don't involve everybody, but then are referenced in the ordinance, so that we don't have practice conflicting with law.
Right, and that's what you have in this document right now.
Correct. So that's basically the goal. So I think we're really open not to stipulate to anybody who should be in the room, to provide us with ideas and suggestions to consider. I think we're pretty open on that. We want it from legal, from
Yeah.
a whole broad spectrum.
Add to that, Linda?
Counselor Jordan?
Yeah, just to add to what Linda's saying is, perhaps instead of just having the next meeting being general comments from the fire department leadership, could you take chapter 42 and give us your draft of what the leadership thinks it should say? And then we can bring that in, and then we can at least have a discussion of saying, okay, we think, section 1 should say this and section 3 should say that, and then we can go through your recommendations and have a dialogue.
Sounds fair.
Okay.
Sure.
I think that would be
I
helpful.
think that would be very helpful, because you're the ones running the show.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right.
Sure. Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. Thanks for coming down tonight. I would say that even as you're going through it, anything that is by contract, just note that it's by contract and
Right.
it doesn't belong in the ordinance any longer.
Right.
I think that there's no reason to have to try to renegotiate anything. If it's by contract, just
Doesn't need
let's
to
get
be
it
there.
out of the ordinance book.
Correct, I agree.
Counselor Sullivan?
I think we need to even have a discussion around the contract things. If we've got items that have been put into contracts that are contrary to city ordinance, I still don't understand how that even happens in the first place. And I think we do have to have a discussion around those.
Well, I'm sure if we get recommendations like residency, you'll hear, I'm sure, on this residency point, there's a school of belief out there that we have had residency before this was ever contemplated in the contract, and yet they read provisions contrary to the ordinance. And so we'll get into those scenarios, but I think we'll do it in the context of their recommendations.
Right. But those are the kinds of discussions
We're gonna
that
have to
will
have
need to
those.
take place down the road.
Residency is a big one, and then the vacation time, which is part of the composition of the fire department. Why it was put in there that way, I don't know.
Right. Right.
And it's not a big section of the composition, it's maybe a paragraph. Saying you can go home early on Christmas and Thanksgiving for dinner. I mean, that's,
Okay.
things like that.
Well,
People don't really care about that.
no.
well, we look forward to the feedback, and I think to just follow that chapter and give us something to work on.
Sure.
And we can have one or two different versions
Yep.
from different perspectives and take a look at those.
Now, if I can say one thing, the section that Counselor Sullivan mentioned about the fuel storage, that is the Board of Public Safety. It's a totally different board. It consists of the fire chief, the police chief, and the city engineer. They oversee that whole section, so,
If you can just mark that
yeah.
for us,
Yep.
then
Okay.
we can pull that out,
Sure.
maybe. Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much for coming down. I think it helps to get a framework. And once you're ready to come back to us, if you go through Ryan, submit it over to him so that he'll let me know and we'll put it on the agenda so you're not pressured. But what do you think would be a reasonable time frame?
I already have this mostly marked up already, so it won't take that long.
So,
2 weeks,
okay.
if that works.
All right, well, we'll look forward to that and we'll put it on the agenda as soon as possible.
Okay.
All right,
Thanks.
well,
Could we have Ryan also send an invitation to do the same off to the union as well?
I mean, you're communicating, right? Or,
I can certainly reach out to them.
yeah, I mean, this is a process, so we're looking for feedback from different points of view. Either way.
Yep.
It's fine.
Whatever works for you guys.
We'll count on you to let them know that we're looking for
Okay.
input on the chapter.
Sounds good.
All right, well, thanks a lot for coming down. Our political 5 minutes, that was at least 10, has now ended.
I make a motion to table item 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks a lot. So, I haven't had a chance to read the previous meeting minutes thoroughly, but if we could have a motion to take them up, I did see one thing in them.
Okay, motion to remove item number 1 from the table.
All in favor?
Aye.
So I noted in the minutes that at the last public hearing, we had corrected the zoning for the accessory sign matter from BH to IG.
Yeah.
And in the minutes, it reflects that we made it BH. So I've let Ryan know he will be correcting it, but it's in the copy that you have. So I just want to note that so that it will be corrected.
You should make a motion to amend the minutes to reflect that. Make a motion that the references to BH relative to IG zoning, excuse me, signage zoning and rules is supposed to say IG, not BH.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. But if we can leave them on the table till
Okay.
everybody has a chance to read them.
Motion to put item 1 back on the table?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Could I have a motion to open the public hearing for items 2 and 3?
Motion to open up, reopen up the public hearings on items 2 and 3.
You want to do 2 and 3 before you go to the sign ordinance, since we have,
Guess?
He's here on all 3, he said,
oh, okay,
so.
great. 1 and 2, 2 and 3.
2, 3, yeah.
2, 3.
All right, so motion to continue the public hearing, open and continue the public hearings on 2 and 3.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So item 2 is ordered that the City Council Ordinance Committee hold a joint public hearing with the Planning Board on the creation of zoning ordinances related to recreational marijuana retail locations. Item 3 is ordered that the City Council Ordinance Committee hold a joint public hearing with the Planning Board on the creation of
Some stuff here,
zoning
Rebecca.
ordinances related to recreational marijuana cultivation and production. So we are in the public hearing now. I understand that Marcos was here and did want to give us some information as part of the public hearing. So if, with the
Yeah.
committee's
Of course.
indulgence,
Marcos, by all means, our esteemed guest. How are you?
Thanks for the invite.
Your green light is on?
Yes. Thanks for the invitation. The planning board hasn't had the opportunity to see this in depth. They did provide some early feedback as to how they wanted staff to deal with this. I did have the opportunity to speak with Crystal, and it sounded like there was a lot of similar feedback from the last public hearing from the ordinance committee. So over the past couple of days, Crystal and I got together and started working based off of the medical marijuana ordinance that was passed, has it been 2 years now? Time
Something
flies.
like that, yeah.
So hopefully you have before you what's meant to be a rough draft.
the one that starts with 7.10 at the top?
7.10, yes, cannabis facilities.
Everybody has that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the prior ordinance, it's funny, we work on this so much and then we go back and look at it and realize how clunky it was. We were really mimicking what the Department of Health, their language when they were regulating medical marijuana facilities. But now that we're going to have 2 regulating entities at the state level, the Department of Health and the Cannabis Control Commission, we felt that it was appropriate to have a little bit more general language, and particularly with what we believe is the feedback on manufacturing. So, again, what we did was we took the template of the medical marijuana facilities, which we felt was, after all the discussion, addressing a lot of the potential negative impacts in the community and the considerations in the process. And particularly in the definitions portion, we worked on that, and we defined 4. There used to be 3 categories, if I'm not mistaken. One was a place where you manufacture, or was it 2 categories?
It was 2. It was the medical marijuana,
Yeah, the names are
and then the
unwieldy.
OMMD.
That
It
was
was
the
the-
first problem.
yeah.
It was either the place where you just dispense or the place where you can dispense and manufacture all together. So sort of like the special permit for the combined location. Even though you may not be dispensing, you would have the special permit for that. So what we did is we broke that out. And if a location would want to have more than one function, then they would have to apply for the special permit for each. So the first one is a marijuana manufacturing establishment. No matter what they're doing it for, it's a very similar process. You're either intaking a seed, you're planting it, you're growing it, and you're processing it somehow. You're either, however the end way of the end retail product is, it's a manufacturing process. So that's defined as a location that cultivates, possesses, processes, including development of related products such as food, tinctures, aerosols, oils, or ointments transfers or transports marijuana or products containing marijuana. And it clarifies that the growing of marijuana would be a manufacturing process not subject to agricultural exemption, which basically, if you're doing agriculture, if you have 5 acres, you can do it anywhere. This is clarifying that you can't do that. The second one is a medical marijuana dispensary. So this is only the function of dispensing marijuana in the form of a medical product, which cannot be consumed on site as of the last ordinance and the state regulations. So this is more akin to a medical clinic that sells, distributes, dispenses, or administers marijuana products containing marijuana or related supplies specifically for medical purposes. So that would be a different type of facility. The third one, and what seems to be a little bit more, that will need a little bit more follow-up, will be recreational marijuana retail establishments. This would be your think of it, the dispensary that's not medical, right? Just the recreational consumption. So same definition as the medical one, but not for medical purposes. And then the last one, which I think has garnered less attention in the public realm, but equally important, is marijuana testing facility. So under the new legislation, it allows what are essentially third-party laboratories to be licensed by the Cannabis Control Commission for independent quality control. So you think about, there are companies that are making representations as far as their product. You need to have an independent party that's certifying that there aren't contaminants, that what they're certifying is accurate. So these companies would be taking samples at the companies themselves that would be able to bring cannabis product onto their location, do whatever testing they have to, and then destroy the product. So because of the presence of the product, it's been included here. Those are the 4 main categories. So the rest really follows what we had designated before. What I'm sure will be a lively discussion is in what zones these are permitted. The planning board hasn't really made a recommendation as to what zones, although they have indicated that their preference is similar to what the recommendation was the last time around. Whether that's going to be their final recommendation, I can't really say, but that basically looks like industrial general and industrial park for the manufacturing functions. For the more commercial functions, that looks like the business zones. I can't venture to say what the testing facilities where they're going to limit it. I would assume that they would follow what other labs are where they're allowed in the city, and I think they somewhat correlate with business zones, but not necessarily all business zones. In terms of operational requirements, the big the one area that's less known to me from the state is how they will manage on-site consumption. There's something to that effect, I think, of the state law, but they're onboarding their executive director now, and we've reached out and expect to have a conversation with their executive director and/or the chair of the commission later in November to see where they're going with that. Other than that, it really mimics, and we've taken the same framework. Some of the other differences, and we've kept the same times there. We've suggested everyone consider increasing the gross floor area to 15,000 square feet instead of 5,000 square feet for.
What is the numerical reference on that?
I'm sorry. It's 710. It's the second page of the draft. 710.5, operational requirements, subsection 2, which is physical requirements, and that would be part C. So specifically for the dispensing, think about the retail establishments, whether recreational or medicinal, still keeping a limit there, but increasing it to 15,000. We very recently saw it's almost completed the construction of a cannabis facility just across our border with West Springfield, right near Babala Road, and it's 15,000 square feet. So a consideration.
Is at 15?
It's a total of 15,000 square feet.
Right now, it's up to 15,000.
Currently,
Well,
it's up to 5.
this is in the draft. Right now, it's up to 5, correct?
5 is our current one?
5 is current.
Oh, okay.
The request to
So
triple that.
is your
Make it a supermarket.
idea that this would replace the medical marijuana ordinance?
Correct. It would make it encompassing of both. Instead of having to have two ordinances, it would encompass both.
If I may.
Counselor Lisi?
But that, I mean, that is what we requested Crystal to do in this draft, to condense everything into a
I don't
section.
think, Crystal, you didn't draft this, they gave you this.
We did it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just clarifying what it's,
Could we get a red line
because it's going to be very hard
to
to
compare it to the
compare
current, or?
to the actual. If
And we could probably do a merge between the documents and see what's redlined.
We could, yeah, or at least if we could get this in Word.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no, absolutely. So that, I mean, that's a consideration. It's, I'm putting it out there because there is a facility of that size. We're not, the manufacturing was not limited in the prior ordinance. We wouldn't, we're not recommending that be limited. Obviously, manufacturing
What not be limited?
manufacturing facilities. It wasn't limited before. We're not recommending that it be limited. Neither testing facilities. If you think that a third party, I don't know how many licenses the state would provide for labs, but you could see like a regional lab that deals with half the state, right? So you could have like 50,000 square feet of a lab testing facility, or something to that extent. And then there are a couple of highlighted places where we expect specifically the Cannabis Control Commission would very likely have regulation, and where we had called out DPH code of regulations, and so we just added the Cannabis Control Commission XXX because we expect something will come out of that. We have added enough language in there that says, you have to be in compliance with all state regulations as well. So even if we don't have the exact number there, it's not, no one's going to get a free pass. Everyone has to be.
Should we add federal?
I don't know. Up to the council.
Oh, okay.
I
Just
have
wondering.
I have a question before we go on to
Counselor
the next
Lisi?
page. So for section 2C, you're telling us that there is currently a medical marijuana dispensary just over the border in West Springfield at 15,000 square feet?
It's
Cultivation, isn't it?
I think it's a total of 15,000. Yes. The building is at 15,000 square feet.
And
That's just
and
being
it's
built.
just dispensary, or is it, just so that I'm clear, because we have now divided out our language.
I see. Yeah.
Previously, the RMMD encompassed the grow, cultivation, and dispensing in the license. And
I can go into the details of their site plan review and get back to you on that.
yeah, I'd be interested to know if that is production, cultivation, and dispensing, or if it's only a dispensary.
Yeah. I didn't think they were actually growing it there, but I will get back to you with that answer.
And then just, again, because I don't work on site very much to understand what 15,000 square feet is, but what would 15,000 square feet be?
50 feet by 300 feet.
Two ways of measuring it. Yes.
So this room is probably like 90 or 100?
5 houses. 5 houses.
15, yeah.
5 big houses.
Oh, yeah, 5 big homes, yeah. That's right. Average good-sized home is about 3,000 square
Right.
feet.
I mean, just to get a visual.
I could provide a comparative to that. If you think of the H.H. Richardson station, the right next to the tracks is all told basement, first floor, and the 2 little mezzanines is about 12,000.
Which is big, but not tremendous.
I'll leave that judgment up to you.
It depends on if, how many stories, right? Because the square feet are going to depend on the stories as well, like how many
Right, you can
floors
have a thousand,
you're getting square footage out of.
1,000 square feet by 15 stories, or 3 stories at 5,000.
Thank you.
So I think with the guidance that we've gotten, we provided the framework for the body to look at. The planning board takes this up again November 14th, if I'm not mistaken, and we would probably provide the same draft for them. If there's I don't know if there's any feedback now. It's not really fair to you. You've just recently saw this, but we
No,
did
I
want to
really-
provide something that as the committee had requested.
I appreciate you bringing it down and walking through some of the portions of it. But to Counselor Jourdain's point, we really need to be able to compare them side by side. It's very difficult to
Yeah, we could.
do it on paper.
Yeah, we could probably do that.
Thanks. Counselor Jourdain?
First thing I'd like to say is, in terms of the actual framework in section 7.10.2, I like the way you framed the 4 buckets. So I'll say right at the get-go, those all make a lot of sense to me. 7.104 is where the debate will begin, which is where currently. And if memory serves, I believe MME, or what would be the equivalent of your MME now, which I believe is what we're calling our manufacturing facilities now, is IG only. And you've expanded it to say, recommend IG and IP in this draft.
Correct. And the reason why I added that one, well, number one.
I'm
this
going
is-
to kind of, just not to steal your thunder, but
Yep.
I'm going to get into the, come back to
Go
these
ahead.
as to
Yep.
why.
Yep.
Okay, in a minute, because I want to talk about that because it's very important. So let's just, as we're gathering our thoughts, we're going to think about IP for manufacturing and why that's a good idea or not. And medical marijuana dispensaries currently is IG only as well. And on this proposal, you're looking to go from IG only to a plethora of zones here throughout. And then recreational, which is going to be these retail facilities you're proposing, which currently don't exist in current law, but you're putting those in even more zones than in the medical marijuana dispensary. I also see that you add on a shopping center zone, which doesn't, to my knowledge, exist.
The shopping
Or
center
does-
zone.
Oh, I'm sorry,
yeah.
it does, but
It's
it's
the
at,
RC.
but it's the one at.
Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble. So you'd be thinking to put a retail shop for marijuana inside that zone. Marijuana testing all over. So thinking about this for a moment, and again, mindful of the fact that I am a skeptic of this, of all of this. What I am told is by those, including yourself, who are strong proponents of this in this administration, is this was designed as economic development for the community. That this is designed as, there is nothing better than this. This is the best we've got. Nothing will provide more money, nothing will provide more jobs than marijuana. Okay, and I recognize this is the state of my hometown, that this is the raising of the white flag, if you will. So I'm told by those proponents that this is what we're going to do to cultivate and improve the downtown. So why aren't we focused on these downtown zones? We have no problem leasing space at Barnes and Noble. We have no problem in our Ingleside area or our Holyoke Mall and these other places. We have plenty of retail to go there. Why on earth would we want to consider putting these marijuana facilities, which to 44% of the community that did vote against it, do find this to be a noxious use, and do find that there is certainly concerns about subjecting our children to walking by these facilities, and are also very concerned about the proliferation of smoking parlors and all the other things that are going to be coming from this, which we think are socially not improving the social health and well-being of the community. So why not have it downtown it's locked up in these big buildings and no one will see it, and it's going to be like Fort Knox with all their tremendous security and you'll never have any worries. So is this a turn of events for the administration that they're now saying shopping center zones, BH, that's probably one of our most prolific zones in the whole city. Does the administration have a comment on that?
It is not an official position of the administration at all, as I was saying when I started. And this is the problem. I don't want to preempt the planning board, which is going to be issuing a recommendation to the ordinance committee. I put together, and honestly, a couple of minutes ago, I was thinking just taking everything off, so it didn't become an argumentative issue. We're trying to provide a framework. And particularly on the retail side of things, what I was trying to follow was what the planning board said, because I'm honestly just going to provide this to the planning board as a draft as well. They said mimic our recommendation, where it was industrial zones for manufacturing, and then all business zones for the business uses. So I literally went through the table, was it 4.3, of allowed uses, and for the two retail uses, medical and recreational, I went through what retail sales would be allowed for. And for testing facilities, I looked at where lab spaces were allowed. This is merely intended as a draft for discussion. This is not a policy position.
Okay.
Except for one, which is the IP zone for marijuana.
I was going to say, let's turn back to that, and of course, I gave you a very charged question there, obviously.
That's fine.
And inflicted with my own opinions, but also, as you know, I come from the totally different camp about where Holyoke is going in direction, having lived here for 45 years, now about to be 46 on October 28th. Thank you. Now, let's turn to the question, as you're succinctly pointing out to be, IP zone for the manufacturing. So we said IG, the view of IG, just to refresh everyone's memory, was these were our most blighted areas. These were the mills that needed the help. So the view was, yeah, we're not thrilled about marijuana, but what else can we get to go in there? And it's going to be a financial boon for everybody. Okay, so we were sold on IG. I voted for IG. IP, tell me about that. What are you envisioning? What are you seeing at the downtown that has IP that would be a good fit for manufacturing?
Sure. So, and I appreciate that whole perspective. You're right in your description of the prioritization of the IG, in that's where most of our industrial vacancy is. It's an old inventory, and therefore it's harder to convert into any use, even when it is manufacturing. Modern manufacturing practices are much different, and so whether it's clearing space or loading space, loading docks, it becomes problematic for modern manufacturing. However, when you compare something like indoor growing facilities and the amount of money that you would have to pour into a large old brick mill versus, say, converting it to housing, you may be facing, on the housing end, over $150 a square foot versus a much, much lower number for something like manufacturing, where you're gonna put in the lights anyway, right? But you can use a much more raw space. And then the benefit of Holyoke is we have the cheap renewable electricity, we have plenty of water, and we have that plenty of space. So you're absolutely right there. With the IP, is that when you look at the land vacancy, most of it is in the IP. And so while we may prefer to direct private companies to the IG zone, which has most of the building vacancy, there is a certain amount of companies that are not interested in taking the risk on rehabbing a building. There's a risk with any business venture, since then we've had experience trying to sell companies on doing a rehab instead of new build, but some folks are just adamant on new build. And so pointing again to West Springfield, just around the corner from Babala on Babala Road, well, it becomes something else, International Drive. The third parcel right after Holyoke, there's one there. I mean, that's not materially different than the IP zone that we have on that side. But it is, whatever the council decides is what the council decides. But I'd be doing a disservice to you if I didn't tell you that over the past 2 years we've learned that we are foregoing some opportunities there for new construction. That's why IP is added there.
In thinking about IP downtown, one of the things that the committee discussed was if we were to add IP, that it be of a certain amount of size. So as to say it would be IP downtown, not IP on John Kelly Way or some of these other locations. So I just want to be clear, there is IP outside of the downtown. And the goal of this was to revitalize downtown.
So IG is mostly downtown. There is IG outside, a few IGs outside downtown, but IP is not present downtown. We have, if I'm not mistaken, 2 places where we have IG.
There's no IP downtown.
The IP is around Kelly Way, on the southern side.
I'm aware of that.
Holyoke, and around Whiting Farms Road, there's,
There's a piece of IP there,
yes,
and we have no IP in the downtown.
nope.
Okay, so then let me touch on that again. So why would, again, I guess I'm at a loss then, because IP, to have it up on Kelly Way, I mean, we're having difficulties getting development of other types besides marijuana to go up on Kelly Way?
Yeah, there's been vacancy on a lot of those plots of land for a while. And Hedick owns one property, Hedick/HG&E on Whiting Farms Road. It's 11 acres, developable, probably 5 to 6. And there are a couple of parcels left around Kelly Way, privately owned, substantially large. There were a couple additional parcels, but they were developed with solar fields because reality, new construction is also hard to come by. Even in the Massachusetts economy out in Western Mass. So it's not, think of it less of like prioritizing one over the other. It's that there are companies that will only want to build new. And so in that sense, there isn't really an opportunity cost for the downtown. Some companies just want a modern facility and not have to take on a new
A
build.
retrofit?
And for those, we don't have inventory for them. That's all.
Counselor Lisi.
Okay, I'm gonna jump off at this point, but I was under the impression there was some IP that was downtown, that people were looking at certain parcels, but now that I understand it's only in Ward 5, thank you, that's very clarifying.
Counselor Lisi, and after Counselor Lisi, and welcome to the chambers, Counselor McGivern, I'd like to open it to the public. There are members of the public here. Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. So I think what I want to just highlight is that the case for manufacturing and process and cultivation of medical marijuana and recreational marijuana downtown is for the repurposing of the old mill buildings. However, when we had set Crystal off to create the draft that we wanted to look at and organize it in this fashion, we did pull up the alternative version that had passed out of ordinance committee and then didn't get passed by the full council.
It had IP.
And that, it had IP for the manufacturing component. And then it did have all the business districts for the off-site medical marijuana dispensaries. So that was in there. And then I don't think that it's the same 8 zones that are being proposed, at least in this draft, are replicated. So it doesn't become increasing more liberal for retail sales compared to medical. It's still 8 zones. And I thought that you were implying in some way that it becomes more and more broad along the way.
Sure, let me just quickly answer that. I was my understanding, and again, I will come back to the conversation, that we agreed for the purposes of discussion. I know Linda was not a big fan.
I already am on the record.
On IP,
Opposed.
because she represents Ward 5, but we were gonna, and I jumped on board to add IP for discussion, not saying I'm gonna
Yeah,
vote for that.
sure.
I
But
didn't
just
know
for,
there was none
just for discussion. However, right, the view at that time was, when we talked, was there was some IP downtown. Now we're learning there is no IP downtown. So that's enlightening. However, on the other part, I don't recall us ever saying 8 zones for all of this retail, talking about all of that.
We never passed it,
was
but it passed out of
proposed.
committee.
No,
It
no,
passed
I-
out of committee.
I appreciate that, but I don't recall us asking the marching orders of the law department to add in the draft these 8 zones, because I know I would not have voted for that. I'm for as restrictive as we legally can do it to meet,
right.
but there again, this is all a draft.
Right. Thank you. So I'd like to open up the public hearing to members of the public who wish to speak. I know, Marcos, you have more, but there are people who kind of wanted to come down and speak.
Can I say one more thing about Marcos's role here? Yeah.
Sure.
So thanks, Marcos, for working with Crystal on formulating this draft. And I don't want us to be like, Marcos, why did you put this in the draft? When I feel that to a large extent, you're working with Crystal to reflect the comments that we had put forth at our past meeting, and that the planning board is working with you on another angle altogether. So I just don't want this document to be represented as something that like Marcos created and that Marcos is now defending. because I don't see the document like that.
I mean, I appreciate it, but I mean, it's all right.
It's a
I think
draft.
as long as you understand that
It's a
I'm trying,
draft,
as long as you understand that I'm trying to make many people happy, and therefore it's a draft until the proper bodies can, in the proper order, decide what they're deciding. Then ask me my opinion when you want my opinion. I'll give it.
Thank you.
So if members of the public wish to weigh in on the recreational marijuana and any aspects of it, the two orders that I read, you can come up to the microphone, give your name and address, and make any comments relative to the subject that you choose.
Just make sure the microphone's
Is
on,
it,
sir.
you might have to push the button,
There's a-
pull the button toward you.
There's a button on there.
Better? Better?
Might want to pull it up a little.
Name and address.
Better?
Yes.
Fantastic. My name is Andrew Kupperman. I live in Wilbraham, Massachusetts, and I am here as a startup entrepreneur working with John Snyder, recently joining John's team at 6 Appleton. And I'd like to take 2 and 3 in reverse order because that's really how the plant is produced. First you make it and then you sell it. So in terms of growing it, I would urge that the zoning and ordinance process happen as expediently as possible because businesses need guidelines and can't operate effectively without knowing what is coming. So I would urge that, especially when it comes to cultivation, that as quickly as possible, as simply as possible, whether you add IP is something that you'll have to figure out, but that's not my problem. With regard to number 2, right, that's retail sales. I'm going to bring some thoughts that I've had recently for you regarding what it's going to look like in the parking lots and neighborhoods around recreational retail sales. That's going to be a pop-up for street activity of all types, not just marijuana, all types. And so what I would ask you to think about as you look to the long term is that you have a singular district where all the dispensaries and coffee shops and restaurants can operate, and it's monitored by private security with the help of the Holyoke Police. And you don't have to worry about it happening in 17 different places, because otherwise you'll be chasing the street activity forever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Snyder from Boston, Massachusetts. And like Andrew said, we've recently taken control of an old 65,000 square foot mill at 6 Appleton Street. And our stated intention with the building is to both go for a cultivation license and also a producer's license. And we think that, you know, the current zoning with it in IG makes the most sense because it can create a kind of community where all of those types of businesses are centered. It makes it easier on the local municipalities with police and fire, makes it easier on us to protect our you know, operations kind of collectively because it's all in the same kind of area. There's already, you know, a stated purpose at 1 Cabot Street, right across the street from us at 28 or right across the canal at 28 Appleton Street. GTI is already operating across the street from us at 5 Appleton Street. There's another business with a stated purpose. That's a good kind of collection of places. And one thing I would add in addition to kind of my recommendation to stick with IG being one of the zones for producing and cultivating is something Marcos touched on, and that's the labs. Taking into consideration that the testing facilities will be very secure. They won't have a lot of traffic of enormous amounts of pot shipments leaving the buildings to go to different dispensaries. really consider to open up the kind of town to something like a lab. There's only one lab in all of Western Massachusetts, and there's a lot of cultivation and producing that's going on out here, and a lot of dispensing. And that one lab can't handle that. And that could be another great kind of position for Holyoke to focus on, is that if you really are welcoming to that group in a variety of areas where they could work with different landlords, whether it's building it from ground up, which a lot of lab facilities want to do. The potential for that isn't as great down in the IG zone as it might be in other areas of town. But it could really be a, kind of a central location to the businesses around the area. And then that's bringing more tax base and more business into Holyoke. So I really appreciate the opportunity for letting me speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, Marco, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to let folks weigh in. Were there other particular details in here that you wanted to specifically bring to our attention?
Not really. In terms of the application procedure, we clarified a couple of areas where it was, some areas it was saying, send to the city clerk. Some was saying send to the city council. We're suggesting to just streamline it to the city clerk, assuming that whoever the special permit granting authority, assuming it ends up being the same, would be forwarded to the special permit granting authority. But in terms of administratively, who's receiving everything, not separating it out. But other than that whole half of the ordinance seemed pretty valid. We had one fire drill with that, right? We went through one permitting process, and unless the council has any feedback for planning staff to consider on what we should change, it seemed like it worked, and it gave the special permit granting authority the mechanisms to do its job.
Would you see the security language in the medical marijuana staying in? On a quick flip, I don't see it.
The language stayed in, and it requires a sign off from the chief of police still, so that gives plenty of leverage to the city and discretion as to what it's requiring, instead of saying X amount of cameras or this or that.
Right.
I mean, the police chief needs to be confident that the place is secure. So that language we actually did not touch.
Yeah, moving forward, it looks very familiar. Now that we're moving into, yeah, I would say 710.6 and forward looks almost identical to what I remember being in the previous ordinance.
We'll have to, I don't want to take up the time now to get into all the detail of it, but thank you very much for bringing this down.
I could ask a question.
Councilor McGivern.
Marcus, on the manufacturing part and the language will be identical. Will the actual manufacturing eventually be the same, whether it's medical or whether it's recreational? The manufacturer can sell to one or the other?
So your question is on the manufacturing process?
Manufacturing, yeah.
I would imagine that very similar, well, the same as far as growing the plant. I would imagine that there are going to be differences in how you process the plant afterwards. Some of the medical uses, they're actually not targeting the THC, but they're trying to get out the most cannabinoids. They may find ways of growing the plant with less THC and more cannabinoids. So, how you deal with the pH levels in the soil or the water, that kind of stuff. But the process, by and large, should be very similar, sort of to what you look at when you see a machine shop. You have similar elements, but you will have different specific processes, if that makes sense, right? If one manufacturing center will make lozenges, the other one will make, I don't know, cookies, so they'll have different machinery, but
the product is the product. In the right setting, the differences can be done in the same facility, I would think. Springdale, isn't Springdale an industrial park over?
So this may be where the confusion lies. There is a Springdale Industrial Park, which is a description of an agglomeration of land for industrial uses, but it is not zoned
None of it
industrial
is zoned
park.
industrial
It is
park.
zoned industrial general. Yeah, so maybe that's where the confusion lied.
Okay. I always did get confused by that. I know it's very early, Councilor Bacon, and I don't want to get into the argument that part of this But I think the key word in this language, and always is the key word, is by special permit. And I don't have a problem looking at a multitude of zones as long as it remains by special permit.
So Marcos, did you want to weigh in on the draft relative to section 7-11 at all? That's yours, so he's, okay.
7-11?
It's on the moratorium.
Oh, I didn't work on that one, so I don't know. I don't even know what's in
Do
it.
you know if, has there been discussion with the planning board relative to a moratorium on the retail of the recreational, or moving ahead with a recommendation relative to an ordinance?
There haven't been any formal conversations, no hearing that's opened. I would imagine that some of the planning board members would consider it if we're like against the clock. I think what I've heard them say to me individually is we have enough of a runway to work on it in the coming months. No licenses are going to be issued prior to July, and prior to April 1st, there will be no application period. So.
Right, but do recall, if you will, that there has been a certain amount of urgency placed on this committee to get back to the council and move on this. And that occurred during the conversations around a moratorium, yes or no?
Yeah,
And
and
so, just to be clear, that we're feeling that we are supposed to be moving ahead and getting this done. So, just,
Yeah,
that's just a
Can I add to that?
perspective. Counselor Jordan?
The general view was, and picking up what Andrew said earlier, was that we wanted to get cultivation, manufacturing done. That ordinance in place, whatever it's gonna be, and do a moratorium also now on the retail side, and develop more time to figure out, is it gonna be one zone, is it gonna be multiple zones, is it, how are we gonna, because I think that, basically, I think there's consensus on the manufacturing piece. I think the only thing that there might not be consensus on now is adding IP to IG. IG's good, right? We're in agreement on IG. We already have IG in the current law. So let's just get that done, but we'd like planning board to at least give a recommendation so we can, move that piece of it along. Or I think we're gonna have to start moving notwithstanding. I think there is time limits. This has been given to them quite a while ago. So, under the statute. So the other piece is, then we would also like to put in a retail moratorium and then get to point 2, which is banging out an ordinance on retail, which is gonna be all these, depending on, what hours, what zones, what this, what that.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. The two things that I wanted to raise are, number one, the planning board is an independent body, so I don't think that they need to take direction from us. If we want to go in the direction of moratorium, they don't have to reflect that in their recommendations. And in fact, if they don't follow our lead on moratorium, they can actually use their time to make recommendations so that we could craft language and zoning and all the other details. Like, there's nothing holding us back from doing that. So it seems, if you're talking about this board being under the gun to produce something, the moratorium doesn't work in our interest to actually produce something. The moratorium actually holds us back. And I see the planning board as a source of language to help us move forward on that timeline, as opposed to being stuck or bogged down by a moratorium language. So I just really want to highlight that planning board doesn't need to create a moratorium to mimic us in any way. And then number two, if they actually create recommendations for what retail sales should look like in the city, then we get to move forward on our timeline.
Thank you. I didn't hear anybody say that, so I
Well,
was sharing my perspective of what the council said to us as a committee. I'm not saying anything to the planning board. I totally understand that they're a separate body and make their own recommendations. I was speaking strictly for the ordinance committee. Counselor Jordan?
Well, the only thing I'll add to what you said, Madam Chair, is to say that my understanding is they're supposed to be making recommendations to us, therefore make recommendations. Number 2 is by passing a temporary moratorium, that doesn't, we walk and chew gum here routinely. We pass the temporary moratorium on retail, and we continue the work. It's a temporary. The whole purpose of it is to be in place while we're doing the actual ordinance, that's all. And we would hope that planning would continue to give us that guidance. You know, this isn't going to bog anything down. This is simply to say, while we have no rules on recreational retail, which currently we have no ordinances in place on recreational retail in the city of Holyoke at all at this point. And so this temporary moratorium on the retail side of it was, in fact, what you proposed. That was your idea. So I'm only adopting your idea and saying we should do that, and then in the meantime, keep working on doing it. That's all. So I think we're really in agreement.
Right, and it allows us to move forward with the cultivation aspect.
So just for clarity, because I may be either forgetting something or we may have just dropped the ball. I did not realize that the committee was waiting for a recommendation on a moratoria.
On all of it, we're waiting for a
No,
recommendation.
but the point is, we converted my order, item number 3 on the agenda regarding to recreational retail sales points, into a moratorium. So the planning board is currently not being charged with developing moratorium language to give us a recommendation on. They're charged with creating actual zoning ordinances for recreational retail sales points related to that item.
We're doing both. We're going to pass an interim temporary, or hopefully the committee will, pass an interim retail moratorium and continue working to build the retail ordinance. So what we're saying is give us the feedback, give us the recommendations that they would like. So
Right.
as sooner rather than later is my only
So
point.
from a process point of view, we're not saying that the planning board should give us necessarily a recommendation on moratorium.
Right.
But moratorium comes under zoning. So in order to put forth a recommendation from this committee under that order relative to retail, we have asked legal to craft for us a moratorium on retail.
So there's an order for a moratoria right now.
There's no order.
We-
This is what we amended in committee.
We amended item 2 as a zoning ordinance to create a moratorium.
As
on-
part of this ordinance?
Yes,
Okay.
on the retail sale. We're not saying that the planning board should or shouldn't do anything.
If I may.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. However, I think the point to make clear to everyone is that once we pass a moratorium on item number 3, item number 2, recreational retail sales points, we have effectively disposed of my order and then we would, if we take it all the way to its, logical limitation, which is getting it out of this committee and over to the full city council for a vote, we are disposing of this item that says that we can create zoning ordinances for the recreational sales of, recreational sale of marijuana. Then we would have to start the process anew, file a new order, yes, we would. We'd have to advertise it. I mean, how do you expect to pass something and then leave it on the table? That doesn't make any sense.
You can pass it in multiple, it's all part of the same proposed ordinance. You can have the first component is going to be a temporary moratorium, and then we're going to continue to work on expanding and amending it.
I saw a hand in the audience, and is that somebody wishes to speak again in the public hearing on the matter? Would that be okay? Yes, it is permissible.
I didn't realize until after I was listening to your discussion that I had a thought about the moratorium that I wanted to share. And that is the public view of what they hear when they hear about what's going on in city council. And so the moratorium, from my perspective, is unnecessary, but it seems like it sets a tone in the media that Holyoke is not welcoming businesses. And so I would urge this group to avoid issuing a moratorium unless it was necessary.
Thank you.
In addition to that, earlier, there was mention of how a special permit is necessary anyway. And so if you have to have a special permit to be able to move into the retail recreational sales, you would give enough time to be able to make sure that the ordinances are in place, and once again, not giving a perception to the public of maybe not being as welcoming to the retail businesses, because right now lots of towns are out there actively campaigning to get these businesses, and at least for the producers and cultivators here in Holyoke, it's a lot easier for us to sell, if there's someone else in town who can sell it, for us, as opposed to having to take it, possibly far away, which then creates more logistical and more costs for us as in general.
Right.
And then another thing to speak to is having to do with the security stuff. Marco's mentioned that the police chief has to sign off on things. Within the medical marijuana regulations that the state set forth, there's a lot of guidelines having to do with the security. There needs to be dual systems so that if one goes down, there's a backup. There are other types of guidelines having to do with the police chief having access to your closed circuit cameras remotely, via another IP address. So I think that the state has given some guidance, and then that coupled with the police chief's recommendation, I think that there could be a really good comprehensive plan that would be satisfactory to the community and to the council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Crystal wanted to say something.
Okay.
So the way we drafted the ordinance, and Marcos, correct me if I'm wrong, but we actually incorporated recreational marijuana retail establishment as one of the subcategories of this. So anywhere that you see a marijuana establishment, it's all encompassing unless it's specifically delineated to one of these 4 categories, in which case sometimes there needs to be separate regulations. The moratorium was drafted as requested, doesn't necessarily have to come into effect, but I know you wanted to see some language, that's why that's drafted there for you. But if you wanted to look at the full draft, recreational retail establishments are incorporated, and any special permitting process would then take care of, you can only be open from, say, 9 to 5 to sell, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as the actual security requirements and sign-offs and licensing and all of that, that's all kind of all-encompassing for all the different marijuana establishments as a whole. That's something to consider.
But there's nothing in this ordinance that requires us to add in a testing facility, is there?
Not necessarily. I mean, you're not required to add in any of it. It's all by special permits. So throughout the process, you're going to be able to basically cherry pick how you want to do it.
Well, and I hear the argument about a special permit gives discretion in terms of granting it, but you can't just arbitrarily deny one either. There has to be a basis.
Right.
I mean, I'm hearing special permit be said like it's the be-all, end-all. If it's a special permit, you can just say no, but we know we can't if it's in a zoning. Counselor Jordan?
Couple things. What I thought we had as consensus at the last meeting is perhaps not consensus, but so let's revisit our consensus. I thought our consensus was we were going to modify, and I'm not blaming anybody here, because what you did is exactly what you asked, so
Yes.
you're perfect, okay? What I thought we were going to do, now speaking internally here as ordinance, was modify the current zoning, which would effectively be your MME, to now have recreational and medical, cultivation, good, and we're gonna send that out and pass that out, bang, right? And then and I suppose for that matter, medical marijuana dispensary, because I think that's already in the current ordinance in IG, so we could let that one go through too. But recreational and testing facility, which are 2 new concepts to us, those were gonna be subject to, particularly recreational retail was gonna be subject to a retail moratorium while we debated amending this otherwise ordinance to get into all the nitty-gritty about zones and times and securities, and I mean, that is going to be a long conversation. Whereas The rest of it, I think on MME, MMD, this testing seems pretty innocuous, but it seems like that would be sort of tangential to manufacturing personally. So you might, wherever you allow testing, you allow manufacturing, I would be for letting that go through right now. But as far as the retail piece of it, pull that part out, do that to the temporary moratorium, pass the other three, and roll it out the door, and then now we're only debating that one section, and we're good to go. And that's just, part of our compromise. We're gonna do a retail moratorium on that one piece, which the law department drafted in this 7.11.1, and then we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty of retail and work together towards amending the ordinance to put all that in. So I don't know, I thought that's where we were, but correct me if I'm wrong.
And my understanding was that was why you filed two separate orders, so that they could be addressed separately. That's my recollection of what you said, but.
It is. I even filed to, make two separate moratorium. I mean, but what's aggravating me tonight is that it's being, the reason why we need a retail sales point moratorium is being couched in this argument of we need time to discuss things, but at the same time, you're saying we need to move very quickly because the city council is urging this body to move quickly on the regulations, and yet we're nearly completely done on the medical and recreational production cultivation end, and the planning board is nearly completed a draft on the retail sales establishment. So it seems like we're already at the point where we're having discussions. So we're already at the point where we're having discussions on these things, and we are, having the debates that we need to have, and they're happening in a very timely manner. So I'm not so convinced any longer that the moratorium on the retail sales point is necessary. Furthermore, tell me how we're going to actually act on item number 2 if we do pass a moratorium. If we use my item number 2 to pass a moratorium, it is disposed of.
Crystal, relative to legal process, relative to a temporary moratorium on the retail while we're working out the details so we can move forward on the cultivation, is there anything by passing a temporary moratorium that would prohibit us from continuing to work on the ordinance?
There's nothing that prohibits you from continuing to work. We were just discussing if 7-Eleven is actually incorporated in, basically this would stay the same, but there's then a time clock up against any nitty-gritty you want to enforce, and unfortunately they almost conflict with each other. So this delineates that recreational marijuana retail establishments exist, and this is how they would be zoned, but right now there's a moratorium on us issuing you that license. But there's also one coming from the state as well saying that they're not going to issue the license either. So you could run both of them simultaneously and let it run that way, and while you figure out, is this going to be allowed in a business establishment? Are they going to be allowed to open 9 to 5? Are they going to have these other certain criteria? Whereas if we ran into a really difficult problem trying to do separate ordinances for each type of facility, it made more sense to combine them all, have them all follow the same stipulations as far as security and site plan and application process, and kind of create these subcategories. Whereas if you were to pull out everything that mentions retail establishment, it just makes this really choppy, because at some point you're probably just going to smush it all back in anyways. Whereas you could potentially just run them simultaneously and let them conflict each other if that's what the committee is looking to do at this time.
The only problem, totally agree, but what I would be concerned about is, how are we gonna pass with that mention in there, but with all these zones?
Take them out.
We would have to.
Zones would be up for discussion. This is just a draft.
Okay, all right.
Marcos?
Well, this is an idea. So,
We're looking for ideas.
Take it for what it is.
Always looking for ideas.
Maybe I'm just interpreting what you said here. But 7-Eleven would allow you to pass an ordinance, right, as similar to this or as different as you want, that would have the modular pieces to it, right, defining each one of the uses. And this would say, the city of Holyoke would be impeded from issuing a special permit before whatever date, it looks like it's July 1st, 2018 here. In effect, that is a moratoria, but
We still have
it's
an
not an
ordinance.
indefinite moratoria in that
Right.
on July 2nd, 2018, you are allowed to issue a special permit. And to the point that a gentleman in the audience said before, one of the, from an economic development standpoint, one of the issues that can be detrimental to the city is providing certainty as far as regulations. Now, while the legislative body, at least parts of it, is indicating that there is no certainty because there's an interest in looking to it further, at least there's something on paper that says there is a clock ticking, right, to use your metaphor. And once this expires, then those are the regulations. That provides some level of certainty. And frankly, no one can operate before July 1st anyway,
Right.
Right.
because the state is not going to issue any license before July 1st.
Right.
So if that, I offer it as a possible
Right.
solution.
That
So,
makes sense. And then we need to add a clause. Joe, you've asked some good questions regarding the application process. Joe asked some good questions, and Marcos, we didn't have the benefit of your knowledge previously, unless some of the other gentlemen in the room can answer, is if we were to have a temporary, prohibition on retail, for example, here in Holyoke, does that prohibit someone from applying for the state license on April 1st? Can you touch on that? Because
Right.
Joe's had a good question on it, and I didn't want that lost in the discussion while we have the benefit of.
There's
being
no
here.
categorical regulation yet that would say so. What I can tell you is that from what we've learned from the licensing process on the medical end, that if a town has a moratoria, and they're looking to get ahead in the queue, they get a lot of applications, so they're not going to spend time on it. They're going to prioritize their flow to locations where they understand that the use is welcome or not, because why would they spend time on something that can change?
But theoretically, there's communities, and we need to distinguish, moratoria come in different array. There's some communities that just banned it outright, because we know under the new law, if your community voted down the marijuana law, you can do an outright ban, period. No marijuana, period. And many communities have elected to do that. I gave the list. Now, in a community like ours that voted in favor, then you'd have to have a subsequent vote to put additional restrictions on. So the question is, if we put in a temporary moratorium that says none of these things happen until July 1st, could a person still apply on April 1st to be able to take effect on July 1st, which I think is already what the law says?
Sure, and the best answer I can give you is an educated speculation, I'll classify it as.
Yeah.
Which is, there is no definitive answer to it, because there isn't the regulation. Anything that the legislative body can do to provide the most amount of certainty, or said another way, decrease the uncertainty that this is a move to ban it, right? Because sometimes communities will use this as a way of, putting you at the back of the queue and therefore decreasing the likelihood that you will get a company. And so that's why the suggestion of, if the clock runs out, at least there's a regulation on the books. I can only speculate that may be seen slightly more favorable to the state agency that's inundated with 500 applications.
So we're not really sure one way or the other.
We don't have a definitive knowledge until the regulations are published.
do you have an estimation on when that will be?
They have already published that that they have to have by March of next year the regulations out, because they anticipate taking applications in April.
Joe had his hand up.
Counselor McGivern?
Just taking Kevin's thoughts a step further, too. I'm also worried about, when it comes to moratorium, when it comes to the permitting process, the special permit that the city has to issue. It's a moot point, because until we have our language in place, there's nothing to apply for. But the state is opening up applications for April 1st for the license, the big license. That means they could be ready by July 1st when their moratorium is lifted, if it's not lifted before. What I'm hoping, and it sounds like everybody is on the same track, is that we put our language in place so that the permitting process can also start on the local level prior to July 1st. By then we know the A's, the B's, and the C's of where, what, what are we gonna add to the special permits? What are we gonna demand in terms of location, in terms of security, in terms of what's happening around the site? And as far as the moratorium goes, I mean, it's in the gray area. We passed a moratorium that got vetoed by the mayor. It's just sitting there. It's almost non-existent until we do something with that. And that's, to me, it comes back to, why don't we get the language done? And I want to address the comments before, because I went to the planning board tonight, and I said this at the last meeting. The planning board is a separate body. Staff needs to work with us. Staff needs to be here when we're doing public hearings and talking about this. We need to be developing our language, because we can force a planning board recommendation just by closing the public hearing. Correct. Then they got their clock ticks, they want to give us a recommendation, we'll take it. Correct. If they don't, we can go on and vote. So I think we have to work, and I think we are working, diligently towards adopt a language that we can all adopt. And it's going to take time under retail, I realize that. But language that we can adopt so that we have something in place so that developers out there know what Holyoke is expecting, and they can make their decision, is Holyoke the place I want to put my development?
Thank you. Councilor Lisi? You're all set?
I'm all set for now.
I have just a clarification. So the application process, at least for the current regulations, is that they would apply to the state. The state then looks at the application, makes sure they're in compliance with whatever state regulations there are. They then look to the municipality that these people are looking to open up shop in and say, are they in compliance with you? So a city or a municipality that has everything in place is going to say, okay, they have submitted their application to us. Or they're going to look at that application that was submitted to the state, say, yes, they have their security in line. Yes, they have their site plan. If there's a moratorium in place, the municipality is then at a hold. They would have to say, well, we don't really have anything in place. I don't know if they're in compliance, and it kind of puts this block on that application. So that's where this kind of touchy subject of the moratorium comes into place, is that these applications are just going to get stuck in limbo, and the state's going to move on to the next one.
Right, but if the state has a moratorium in place until July 1st, and they are taking applications in April, isn't it the exact same process?
Well, yeah, but in April, a municipality that has something in place, which we're striving to do right here, say April 2nd, they say, hey, somebody wants to come into Holyoke, does this comply with what your regulations are? You can look at whatever language we have either in draft, or if we didn't have a moratorium and it was just out in the open, then you look at it and determine whether or not they can come here and relay that back to the state before they will issue that license.
But the moratorium will still be in place until July at the state level. Councilor Jordan?
One of the concerns, and just seeing how things operate around here, is my fear is we just pass something that either the council wants X and maybe the mayor vetoes it. I don't know if we override the veto, we don't override the veto, I don't know. We could get to a situation on the retail side of it that we don't have consensus. My concern then is that we have nothing in place. Then there is no special permit to apply for. Then we're back to the wild, wild west situation, which is, where does retail go? If there is no ordinance on it, does that mean you can't come in the community, or you can go anywhere you want? Theoretically, you could set up in residential.
Anywhere in commercial zones,
So,
without a special
And
permit.
that goes to our other recommendations or other
so
suggestions,
that to me is extremely disconcerting. So what I could envision is, we could probably quickly pass out of this committee something that looks like retail. Okay, put your retail in there, but it's in IG zone. Okay, I will never vote to put it up in shopping center and all that. I mean, that to me, nuts. Okay, so anyways, we pass something like that and say the council goes and that's where we go, and then Moore says no, and then, I don't know, maybe there's 10, maybe there's not. So many like marijuana everywhere, so many want marijuana, but what restrictions? I mean, who knows where this goes? And then this goes on and on and on and on and on. And then if the mayor vetoes it and we don't override it, we gotta start the process all over again to amend it, because you can't amend it then. See what I'm saying? This is gonna turn into a very chaotic situation, so, what's my point? Why don't we pass that which we're all in agreement on, which is the manufacturing and the cultivation? I think the only disagreement, fine point, is over IG and IP or IG only. I mean, I don't see any disagreement on anything with that. Why don't we pass that so now we can have recreational marijuana has all the manufacturing cultivation rules, okay? And retail, I think that's gonna be a knockdown, drag down. I can see where this is going, right? Because I think the mayor's gonna come in with everything in this and probably more, okay? He might even include residential, okay? And on the other hand, I think you'll hopefully see the council say, not so much on this. And we'll see where it all shakes out. But that could be a debate, which is my point of why the moratorium is important. It protects the community in the absence of something else. And, if we have no zoning ordinance in place on recreational retail, I would rather have, God forbid, somebody's application go to the back of the pile than for us to say, go anywhere you want in Holyoke. That, to me, is a real concern.
Does you'll have to give your name and address again, because if people are watching, they've lost track.
This is John Snyder again. I have a property at 6 Appleton Street. One thing that my lawyers have advised me, and they represent multiple license holders across the state, is that for my application to be fully submitted and considered complete by the Cannabis Commission, I must have a community host agreement in effect that the mayor signs off on, and I also need the special permit from the city council signed off on, and that's for cultivation, for production, for retail, for any of the licenses. You need to have both of those two aspects to be able for the state to consider you. So it's kind of like applying to college and not having, your teacher recommendation or your SAT scores. They don't start considering you until you have all the pieces in place. And I look forward to coming and speaking before the council, next year in preparation ahead of time, so that there can be, a discussion among the council about both my special permit and the other people who are looking for special permits. If they come to you sooner, it allows both for it to be spoken about down here at this committee level and then also at the full city council level. So I just wanted to add those couple points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, he raises the point that I wanted to add is, at what point do we introduce the concept of host community agreements also being negotiated by the mayor and then ratified by the city council? One of the things is, what I would like to see is, these are a big deal. And it would seem to me that whatever terms the mayor comes up with, at some point, the council should weigh in on, is this generally okay? Just a yes or no. Even we don't change the terms. Only the mayor can negotiate contracts. But it should be a yes or no vote. And I don't know if we should do that in the zoning piece, or we should do that by a separate ordinance. Crystal's in the back seat. So I suppose we could do that under, a separate ordinance, since those aren't, I don't think really host community agreements are under zoning really. So, yeah. So we could do that separately, but we're gonna have to have that conversation.
All right. Is there anybody else who wishes to be heard for input of a factual basis for the committee to consider relative to the matters before us, which are for the retail sale of recreational marijuana and the cultivation and manufacturing, if you will, of recreational marijuana? Not seeing anything at this time. What is the will of the committee? Do you feel we have enough information to debate and make a decision and recommend to the body?
I'm ready to go.
Then,
Make a motion to close the public hearings.
all in favor? Aye. So the public hearing on these two orders is closed. We have a very robust agenda tonight. I'm not certain that we will be taking further action on these unless the committee wants to move
Oh, you can't.
ahead with them now.
You can until the planning board gives you a recommendation.
That's right, we have to give 21 days for the recommendation.
From the
Correct.
closing of the public hearing.
Correct, so we have 21 days to hear back from the planning board. Thank you.
So someone will let them know that they need to give us that. And in the meantime, should we start making, we'll wait till that to start making our amends to the,
Well, I think individual
Proposal.
members can look at it and come up with
Digest
what
it.
you want.
Sounds
But
good.
we do have recommendation relative to the other public hearing I'd like to get to. All right, so if we can move ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Is this on a different matter?
No, it's on this matter procedurally. I have a question.
Okay, Counselor Lisi?
So what we just did was close items 2 and 3, close the public hearings on items 2 and 3.
Correct.
And the way that this conversation is going is that we're leaning towards a moratorium on recreational retail sales. And that's going to give disposal, it's going to dispose of my item number 2 and not allow us to craft and have the conversation on recreational retail sales.
how about this?
But hang on a second, that isn't what I heard from legal.
That is exactly what we heard.
That's not at all what she heard. She said just the opposite.
Right, she said that we could do a temp.
We would need,
Correct me if
we would
I
need a
in-
new order.
Correct me if I interpreted your words incorrectly. I understood you to say if we have a temporary moratorium and the language is in here, including retail sale.
You can continue to craft, but she's correct. Once you make an order on, or once you create an ordinance on the order, it's done. So if your moratorium is what you're creating on this order, that's done. You can continue to craft language,
Right, but
and
if,
when that's in place, you're gonna have to submit a new order to then change the zone.
Do
Right,
the
but if-
advertising over.
if we already include retail sale in this ordinance,
But you're gonna change it after you pull out the moratorium language. Once you change, if you change zoning ordinances, you have to start the public hearing process over again. It's
Right.
what-
but the retail sale will be on the books as an allowable activity based
After
on
the
the
moratorium.
discussion and the language that we're looking at tonight, correct?
Do a text change to get rid of the moratorium.
Okay.
Unless there's
Which
a
means we
date.
need to refile.
Unless there's a
Right.
date.
And open up a whole new public hearing process.
Well, maybe we can hammer it all out between
Well-
now and 21 days from
Well,
now.
yeah, and the other issue is maybe what we could do is
Possible.
we could maybe, I have no problem, the other thing we could do is pass a very restrictive retail,
Right.
and then we don't need a moratorium. And then we can come back if we wish, where there's some that would like to put them in everywhere, including two-family homes, and they can come in then and file an order to do that.
Right, but that's my point. We have another 21 days, maybe we can hammer it out. Counselor McGivern?
So just to Crystal's point, though, but Crystal, the language that exists now says if the language is passed locally, the moratorium goes away. We don't have to change anything. If our language for manufacturing and recreational passes our zoning language, then the moratorium goes away.
3 different functions, don't forget, Joe. So say it one more time, because there's 3 different functions: production, cultivation, and retail
They're all
sales.
right here.
This is all encompassing.
Right.
You wouldn't need a
Our moratorium is on everything that exists.
We're not trying to pass a moratorium on everything.
We already did. It was vetoed by the mayor. It's tabled on the full city council. That's what I'm talking about. If we pass the language, the moratorium goes away completely.
Correct, that one would.
Right.
That one would technically, yeah.
There's a, if I may,
Sure.
Madam Chair, there's,
Marcos?
so not all moratoriums are created equal. There's a moratorium that you're referencing, but I think maybe some members of
one
the
is just
committee
retail.
are talking about the moratoria that Crystal drafted, section 711. that-
Correct.
We haven't voted on that.
No,
That's
no, no.
just a
No, I
proposal.
understand. I'm just saying like.
It's all
as-
just a proposal right now.
Yes, absolutely. Every word in here is only a proposal. But if there was a section 711 that had a moratoria to a particular date, along with the framework that's been discussed tonight, then there is a moratorium, as some councils are suggesting, and then when it goes away, it reverts to language that is all-inclusive here, I think is right?
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Right.
But it wouldn't go away until July 1, so if you want to pass language before then, you have to do the text change.
All right, well, but that's an option, but the point is, but it would still be done, which was my original point. Thank you. All right, so the hearing is closed, moving on. Thank you for coming down, Marcos, but we're on to you still.
So I'd like to reconsider our actions on item number 2 then. I don't want to close the conversation on item number 2 related to the retail sales points.
Why?
Because right now, we're talking about a moratorium.
No, we're not. I could be talking about, I've considered your point.
Okay, so there is no second to your motion, so,
Can I clarify the public hearing timeline? So I know you keep discussing that if you close the public hearing, it starts their 21 days. It doesn't. Planning board has to close their hearing as well to start that 21-day clock. Because per the statute, you can either hold joint or separate public hearings, but because you're holding them separately, they both have to close.
No,
That
we're not going through that again.
if you make that.
I'm
as-
just putting that out there.
as a
The
because-
other day,
As
the
a-
other rule is they have to have theirs within 65 days of the day that they're given to them. Otherwise, that's it on their public hearing as well.
These orders were just submitted at the last meeting.
Oh, no, these have been in for a while.
No,
No, she just submitted brand-new orders because the other order was
8-1.
moratorium and it was vetoed.
8-1.
This was sent to them on August 1st.
17.
This
These
is
were
why the
filed.
planning board should be in this room, and this is getting ridiculous.
I'm
So-
just
You
pointing
know, they
that
are,
out.
they are
No.
not doing their job.
No.
They're
Here's-
sitting over there in the annex. People don't go over to their public hearings. We don't get feedback. Thank God Marcus came in with some feedback.
I'm
Get
pointing
the
it out.
planning board back over here. This is nonsense.
Here's the thing, I would ask you, with all due respect, to go back and research this. The statement that you just made would give an unelected planning board endless power to cause any matter before the city council committee and the city council as a whole to never be able to be voted upon if they simply kept their public hearing open. And that is not correct.
There's a timeline on a specific action that has to be taken, however. So yes, the planning or the public hearings could remain open, but you have to take final action within a certain amount of time. That date does not come to mind right now. So there is a deadline.
Correct.
But yes, you're
So,
completely
I
right.
just want to be clear about
But
that.
I just don't want you all to operate under the assumption that if you close this, there's 21 days for them to act. That's not the case. That was all this
And
was
I
for.
take your point.
Hold on,
I take
hold
your
on.
point on that.
I want to add one point, though. They have 65 days from the day that it's given to them to have the public hearing.
They're opening it November 14th.
No, that we already
Or
have.
they
the
already
first-
opened
already
it. It's a
open.
The
continuation.
statute then says it's 21 days, not from when they close it.
It is from when they close.
It's when they have the public hearing. It's the date of their public hearing, 21 days, or we can move on.
Now, remember,
It's not 21 days
It's from the date of
one day
close.
close, and then we could, what if they never close?
Exactly.
That's not the law.
that's not possible.
That's not the law.
That's not possible. Let me just remind everybody.
This
of
ain't
the
our first
timeline.
rodeo. We've been around a long
I
time.
understand that.
The orders were filed August 1st, and we're almost in November. So whatever timelines there are, they're not infinite. And so we must be coming up on the timelines. And agree with me or disagree with me, the sense from the full city council was for this committee to take these up and move on them promptly, not capriciously, but promptly. So we closed the public hearing because, to our knowledge, there's no other new information that we need to learn in order to have our debate and make our recommendation to the full council. And so it's closed on that basis. And we are awaiting the planning board recommendation. Since there is some lack of clarity about the timeline, perhaps for our next meeting, we could have it. I've looked at the law. I've tried to get an understanding of the timelines. I understand there's a 65-day timeline that it must be taken up and a 21-day timeline for a recommendation.
It's in the statute.
I don't, I mean, there may be debate if you're a lawyer over when the clock starts ticking. To me, the clock would start ticking when you have your public hearing.
To me, the statute's clear. It says 65 days, you have to have a public hearing, After that, they have to make a recommendation within 21 days, or the council can act with notwithstanding if they receive no recommendation. It's very simple.
So, I would entertain a motion to take up item 4.
As a matter of
Wait a minute,
fact,
wait a minute.
just a matter of fact, Madam
Item
Chair,
8.
the state legislature would never create a situation which would be an absurd result, to create a situation where it's 21 days from whenever the planning board closes their public hearing, and if they never close their public hearing, a legislative body of a municipality could never act over a recommendation that we can completely disregard. It isn't even worth, legislatively speaking, not to say these aren't wonderful people, but legislatively, it's not even worth the paper it's written on, because it has no enforceability whatsoever. The council routinely disregards their recommendations. Sometimes we listen to them, sometimes we don't. They have no force whatsoever.
So I'll entertain a motion to take up item 18.
Second.
It is out of order.
Suspend the rules to take up 18.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 18, filed by Counselor McGee, whereas new businesses that have developed around the mall area are looking for better directional signage for their business, and such signage could be placed on private property owners' property, it is therefore requested that the ordinance committee consider a possible new ordinance. We had public hearing on this. We closed the public hearing. And we have subsequently recently received a recommendation from the planning board. And Marcos, if you would like to walk us through that recommendation. I'm not sure all the members have had an opportunity to read it in great detail or not, so.
Sure, so I can do similar to what we did with the marijuana order, provide you with the framework for the recommendation. I anticipate it will be different than what you probably expected, but I will also do my best to explain the thinking
Hang on, looking
behind
to
the
see if
planning
we have
board.
copies.
One note that I'll make up front is I'm not sure if we were responding to language in a different order at some time that reference non-accessory signs. But in the recommendation, in case it's not clear, one of the first recommendations is that this section be titled off-premise signs, including billboards, not off-premise signs and billboards, or non-accessory signs.
And that first thing confused me because we don't allow billboards in Holyoke.
Well, basically, billboards are off-premises signs, and in the definitions of the ordinance, it says, off-premises signs includes billboards, and when you look at the definition of billboards, it says billboards are off-premises signs. Non-accessory signs is actually not defined anywhere in our zoning ordinance, and what other towns do is that they define it as off-premises signs. So the purpose of a sign, if you think of like a pylon sign, is to indicate to the person who's coming onto the property, either a pedestrian or through a vehicle, this is where I am, this is where you enter. The purpose of an off-premise sign, that is to say, a sign that's not on your property. I'm sorry, it seems like you were going to ask a question, so I'm going to stop.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
The purpose of an off-premise sign is to not indicate an entrance, but to advertise something, either something ethereal, right, like watch Game of Thrones or something like that on Sundays, or go to my business, which is 10 miles down the road, but it's advertising something instead of indicating a place of entrance. Colloquially, we say billboards because it's big advertising, right? But so the first recommendation is to call it off-premise signs. That may seem like a small thing, but it would provide consistency with our definitions.
Would there be no reason to just simply create a definition for what we wanted to do, kind of keep it simple?
I don't think this is contrary to your desires. It's just
Okay.
that it's consistent throughout the planning practice, if you will, that instead of non-accessory, that it's called off-premise signs is the standard.
Okay.
So in general, what does what was the recommendation of the planning board? And hopefully I can just give you this in one straight shot and not have to go back and forward. The planning board's view is that, precisely as you brought up, billboards, which are the biggest and most visible forms of off-premise signs, these can become a nuisance in a community. They can start popping up everywhere because you're no longer limiting it to your property as an indicator of where to come in. But essentially any business can put up a sign anywhere else. And so they looked at 3 specific ways of limiting the numbers of these, right? So what are those 3? The first one is by creating an overlay district, specifically 2 overlay districts. So not limiting it to established zones, as in a BH or an IG or a BL, not underlying zones, but an overlay district, which you're familiar with, such as the Arts and Industry Overlay District or the Smart Growth District, professional office. It gives you an additional option to do something there in that overlay. The overlays are defined around the Ingleside commercial area off of exit 15 to the east side of the highway because it's a highly commercial area. And another overlay district off of the exits of 391, another potentially commercial area, although clearly there's residential there. That's way number 1 in which they limited it geographically. The second way is limiting the amount of faces, and this is also something that other communities do. So think of a face of a sign is something facing one direction. So if you have a sign that has advertising on both sides, that is 2 faces, one facing one way and one facing the other. So there's a total of 12 faces in the ordinance, right? So that this doesn't become 100 signs around the city, or even 100 signs in these districts. The third way was suggesting a way that the city could both help businesses and also even potentially reap some economic benefits from this. Precisely because billboards are not allowed in the city of Holyoke, and we control the land around the key highways, right, 391 and 91 for such an extended period of time, that creates scarcity of advertising. And in basic economics, wherever there's scarcity, there's value. So we could potentially reap that value and share that value with local businesses. So what does that mean? As soon as you allow billboards, Lamar Advertising or any other company, I don't mean to single them out, but they're top of mind for some reason. They have a lot of signs. They will provide advertising to the highest bidder. The casino in Springfield, the casino in Connecticut, Viacom, a hospital in New Hampshire, whatever. Whoever has the most amount of money. That doesn't necessarily provide a local benefit. It's just advertising there. Local businesses will be left to compete with the big spenders. Now, we can't by ordinance differentiate between local or non-local. We can't legislate speech. There's a recent Supreme Court judgment on this, Reed versus Gilbert, Arizona, where we can't say, for example, well, in order for you to have a sign, you need to provide space for the city to advertise something, right? Or say, well, we'll give you a special permit because you're local. What we could do, and what's encompassed in the recommendation, is define off-premises sign as a municipal facility. So when you define it as a municipal facility, that's the third level of control. It's in public control. So a municipal entity, which could be the City of Holyoke, it could be the Redevelopment Authority, it could be HEDIC, it could be the Holyoke Gas and Electric, or the Housing Authority. Those are the only public, well, I guess the Water Department is also a municipal entity, right? Could do off-premises signs. Some of it, admittedly, could be for directly a public use, right? Like if the City Hall needed a sign, like right off of 391 saying, I don't know, welcome to Holyoke or something like that, City Hall this way, and it's a particular size, that could be a public reason. But we can actually run an economic development program where, just like we have cheap electricity or we have zero interest loans, we can run a program by which There is, think of a municipal billboard, right, like you have outside in the clerk's office or even on the public access channel, where companies can advertise there, and there's a rate for local businesses, and there's everyone else's rate. So you could through such programming, say through the gas and electric, who would have the capacity to do something like this, and I've already talked to Jim Lavelle, and it's in an exploratory form in case this is something that interests the council. The gas and electric would be able to offer this as an economic development program for local businesses, right? If local businesses can advertise, they'll have better business, and it'll be cheaper to them to do this. They'll have better business. They'll consume more electricity. So you could have, say, I'll throw some numbers out, 70% of exposure time on a digital sign for the going market rate. You could have 25% exposure time for local businesses, and you can even reserve some percentage, it could be 1%, 5%, whatever, for public benefit. There's a Celebrate Holyoke. There's the city council has I don't know if you have an annual meeting like every board, but we're selling the geriatric authority, and on Route 91 that's 100,000 cars a week, and at the same time you're providing a better price for local businesses. You can do that through an economic development program, whereas you can't do that by land use. Okay, those are the three. I know I'm giving you a lot to digest, but those are the three levels of control, because they felt strongly that this is something that can get out of control. The other is by basic standards. So I said 3, then it's 4. Regulating sizes and buffers. So making sure there are buffers from residential areas, from parks, having a special permit process where you have to fly a balloon or similar technology so that it's visible when you're doing this. And then in terms of sizes, they created a 2-tier system where the buffers are greater the bigger the sign is. Kind of obvious, right? So the threshold is 144 square feet. So if you think of 144 square feet is 12 by 12. And then beyond that, the biggest sign that you can have is 800 square feet. Normally, the big advertising signs that you see off the highway, they're more like 1,200 square feet. So this is slightly smaller. And so this ordinance was arrived at taking, particularly in terms of that 4th way, sizes and buffers, looking at ordinances in Chicopee, Springfield, and I want to say Framingham. Yeah, those were the three better ones that we saw. That's a general framework. I think I'll stop there. I talked a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see hard copy of this. We got it on the email.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have a lot of material in front of us. You couldn't find it in your email? Hang on.
6.4, no, I don't, is that this ordinance?
No, it's the one from the planning board.
Oh, could you email that to us at some point, Marcos?
Yeah.
I thought
I
forwarded
could
it
forward
to
that
the-
right now.
I thought I forwarded it to the committee members.
Oh, I must have missed it then. I don't recall that.
If I forward it right now, you get it, right?
Yep.
Sure.
So, we will have to, I guess, take it and look at it. We were taking a much simpler approach to the matter.
Am I sending it to everyone or only the chair?
Everyone, please.
Okay, the committee has it now. Oh, in a second. So while you get that, again, just rehashing, the driving concern from the planning board was that these were, I'll use the word nuisance, or something that can get out of hand. So providing several layers of protection. So I don't know if you want to hear any more from me or not.
Well, you're just a couple probative questions. You're the economic development lead of the community. How many how much demand is there to have billboards on the highway? It seems like there's been, at least anecdotally to me, quite a bit of demand in terms of various people have wanted to have these. As a general rule, we've always said no. We find them to be basically like what the planning board said, which is a nuisance, and sort of, we've always been pleased that they haven't been here, on the basis that basically you'd see this giant cluster of billboards all around exit 15, and then you'd see probably one or two down on 391. That'd be the most likely. But I suppose theoretically, you could have different spots in town that they would want to start putting them up on. So, I mean, if we were ever going to do something like that, I would agree with you, they'd have to be municipally controlled, in that they're noxious, they're not very nice. But if there was some huge public benefit to be reaped, for example, you know, the purist, like I go to Holy Cross Church, so the purist would say, well, you know, do we really want to have, you know, cell towers on the top of the church steeple? Well, no, but on the other hand, sure is nice when that check for $2,500 a month arrives, right? Because that, you know, keeps the church bells ringing. So on the other hand, you know, if we were to do something like this as a municipality and you could grind out an extra 20 grand a month in revenue perhaps, it'd have to be a pretty good sum, and I'd have to see a business plan to sell me on doing it, because it's something historically we've avoided doing, because it's just, they don't, you know, what are you gonna have? The first one up is gonna be, you know, eat at Chipotle, like Chicopee, right? You come off the Mass Pike, eat at Chipotle, and then there's a Chipotle right below it. You know, it's that type of thing, you know? And it looks really tacky, and they're not very nice. But on the other hand, if the community could reap a ton of dough, what I would never support is an individual business getting their own billboard up on the side, and then they reap all the benefit of that, because, you know, that's something we have, as you point out, have avoided doing, you know, up on the side of 91 and 391. Those are extremely lucrative to have. I don't know how many times, in fact, I actually had the individual, and his name escapes me, but the individual that owns the one, because to my knowledge, there's only 3 in their pre-existing, pre-zoning, which is, there's 2 on Route 5 coming up, going towards Kmart.
It's the old WHYN sign, right on the Northampton line.
Yep, and then there's the one, exactly, coming down in the rest area. So the gentleman that owned the one at the rest area on 91 said, I'll take that one down if you'll give me a brand new one by the Holyoke Mall, right? I said, I'm sure you would, yeah. So, you know, there was that, but that got pitched about 10 years ago to us, so that didn't really go anywhere, so I don't know. I like your frame of thought on it, would be my initial reaction, but make sure, you know, and again, I'm going into my swan song here, but if you guys do this in future years, make sure it's well worth doing financially for the community, a ton of dough, because those are extremely valuable, and I think the city could raise a ton of dough if we did it. Otherwise, don't do it. Don't, just avoid them, keep them illegal. But if somebody's gonna, you know, collectively give between all of them 20 grand a month or something, then you know, maybe you gotta consider it.
Could I react to?
Sure.
I think there are 2 questions, right? The demand question, and then is it worth it? So on the demand question for these off-premise signs from private entities, I'll be honest, we haven't heard a whole lot about it. I do know, and you know, we probably have someone here who's in favor of it for their own business. There's likely a couple of businesses that there are in favor.
A lot of people have wanted them.
What is a little bit more nuanced and actually a surprise to me was that maybe it shouldn't have been landowners around 91 that have commercial entities aren't necessarily in favor of it because they have the exposure to 91. They have the ability to advertise their own business And that, depending on who you are, that may be more valuable to you than having a third-party sign from an off-premise. So, I don't know if you can see Red Robin, but I don't know, maybe I'm just hungry, but it came up to me. Like the ability of having Red Robin advertised directly, is probably better from the tenancy standpoint and the rent that you can get from that exposure than having a third party paying you a certain amount of rent per month because you have a pole there. Similarly for the mall or the Ingleside Square scenario. So it isn't. I would say it's not. It's not. Not everyone has the same incentive to have it there or want it next to the highway, but there, as we will probably hear in the public hearing, there's at least a couple of companies that would want to take advantage of something like this. In terms of was it worth it, that's absolutely the question that that we need to clearly answer. When I think of how an economic development project like that could more easily be accomplished and the capacity to do it, I think of the gas and electric. Number one, because they have more staff than the redevelopment authority, which is me and my office. But they also have more capital that they could put up for this and bundle with their other incentives. So if you think about the monthly return on something like this, if you have to rely on someone else to put up the capital, you will have less monetary return. And the monthly check that you can get from advertising is in the order of magnitude that you're talking about, $20,000 a month or something like that. So the HG&E or us for that matter, we wouldn't really take it on unless it is worth it. I mean, absolutely, we have plenty of stuff to do. If it's not worth it, we're not going to go into it. But setting up the process now that you open up the ordinance. How often are you going to do this? This is once in a 5-year timeline that you're going to open up an ordinance. It opens the possibility. There's still a special permit associated with it, so everything can be examined if and when it comes to that.
Marcus, I want to thank you for putting this forth, but I am going to comment that it highlights the problematic nature of limited communication between the planning board and this committee. This committee had a couple public hearings. There was nothing broad-ranging, nothing in any degree whispering about overlay districts, billboards, commercial endeavors, et cetera, from our perspective. So having very limited information coming before us, other than the very simple question of one or two local businesses looking for a limited opportunity, that's the approach that we have taken with this particular order. Mm-hmm. So I would just say that for this recommendation to come in now, I think we received it, I think I got it Friday. If I didn't send it out to every committee member, I think I sent it out to most of the committee. But in any event, it's a whole different direction. It's much, much broader. It's getting into a debate that we didn't even entertain in the public hearings. And I really think it would have to be addressed through, this is my personal opinion, through a separate process that did open it up. I think there's a lot of potential unintended consequences there. You're talking about the same people who I filed the order on behalf of simply to get them a bigger sign. Now we're coming up, and we're not going to give it to the people who've been doing business here for 50 years, but we're going to give it to somebody who's going to come up and throw us a few bucks, and we're going to give them one up on 91. I think there'd be a whole lot of people with a whole lot to say about that. And so that's my perspective.
And so not to represent this part as the planning board's, actually I'll represent what their position has been. Their position is that they recommend this being under public control at all thresholds. However, I will admit that there is a modularity to the ordinance where if the council wanted to open up the possibility for private entities to take on the off-premises signs quickly, then there is a portion of the ordinance that can be changed, and that is the threshold at 144 square feet. That everything up to that size can be made available in the overlay district to private entities, and then only having the bigger, more the extra layer of control, which is the really big ones over 144 square feet, only as municipal facilities. And that way, you're still maybe achieving your goals, if I'm hearing you right, in terms of providing this as a private opportunity, but it's retaining the layers of protection to the city. So, said another way, I don't think the planning board ignored what the intent of the order was. I think they saw it as something that they had to regulate in several ways. You can peel back one of the layers, which is public control on the small ones, if you so desired, to open that opportunity up for a private sector, and it wouldn't have to blow up the entire ordinance. It was designed in modules, so that all you have to do is change one module and say, the large ones are defined as public facilities, but the small ones are open to the private sector.
Right, but then there's the whole debate over the overlay districts, and why should it be those two and not any other, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I couldn't vote for this without public hearings being held in these chambers that addressed the matters within what I call a book. That recommendation is just in way broader than anything we have considered as a committee to this point.
Well, it's definitely different, but I would say that I would categorize the overlay districts as much smaller than any zone that we have. So if I heard Councilor Jordan earlier correctly at the beginning of the meeting, this was going to be limited to an actual zone, a base zone, IG or something like that. There's much less square footage in these overlay districts than, I think I have
The
a copy.
proposed is IG.
Right, so there's a lot of IG in the city.
In this one, yeah. Mhm.
There's a couple of IGs on Route 5, all of.
Not in his, this
all
one
of,
that.
almost all of downtown. The overlay districts are quite tight and only in two locations. So in terms of expansive in terms of geography, I would classify it as much tighter and smaller.
Right, but the overlay districts were established with a lot of public hearing, a lot of public input, a lot of feedback from everybody that would be affected by them. There was robust process to it. This is coming in as a sign order that needs to be modified because it's a zoning issue, but it was never put forth as creating districts and creating billboards and all that. I mean, I just think it's way far afield from the order that we've been considering. But I thank you for walking us through the recommendation of the planning board, and we'll consider it received in committee. Nobody's had a chance to read it, so I don't think.
I've never seen it.
Counselor McGivern?
Good. Non-committee members got a copy?
Yep.
I didn't get it.
I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't. You're in my side field of view. I will forward this to
limited
you right now.
vision.
I'm very sorry.
I mean, I will go by the will of the committee. I mean, we have a draft that we hashed out following the public hearings, and
Going back to
we
the
have,
same question of
forward
the
it.
21 days or the 65 day, are we able to do anything with this tonight?
okay, our public hearing is closed.
Yeah.
We were waiting to receive the planning board recommendation,
Which they have now.
which we have now received. And so now we can act. We can act tonight. If people are comfortable having read and heard the description and in light of this, or if people feel they need to review it to compare it to the draft that we came up with and compare it to the recommendation of the planning board, I mean, I'm here at the will of the committee. I will listen to the will of the body in terms of what you want to do. There is no similarity between the two.
File a separate order on billboards would be
Yeah.
my recommendation.
That would be my recommendation as well, and we would have a robust public hearing in that regard, I would expect.
Different conversation than
Yeah,
one.
Madam Chair?
Counselor Bartley?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm ready to vote on the draft we put together. I think I'm ready for that, so.
There we have, we've received the recommendation, thank you
Got a
so much.
recommendation, that's,
But
I thought it was pretty helpful, but I think it just went a little far afield, so.
no, I'm
Counselor Lopez?
I'm ready to vote, but I also would like to hear more about this late recommendation. I would like to find out more because I may be looking down 20 or 30 years, that will be the way to go. I don't want to sacrifice this guy who have been here for 2 or 3 months, whenever.
Correct.
So I,
File another order.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
So we will
yeah.
follow another
So
order
I
and-
don't think the work necessarily needs to be thrown away, but I just think it needs to be in a different cubby. So we have before us the draft from our work in our last meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to review it and see if it includes the language and amendments as you recall them and achieves what our goal was?
What is the fee? It doesn't say anything. $100?
I'm sorry?
It's $100 the fee for the special permit?
Oh,
It doesn't say. For sure.
okay.
What is it?
100.
Yeah, it's a $100. Okay.
But we don't need to state it in here because it's somewhere else.
In case we
Okay.
change it.
Gotcha. So you have to go into every one. Good thinking.
So this has all the changes that we discussed at the last meeting,
Does
correct?
everybody see the language as you believe it was hashed out? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to be adopted.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have 4 in favor and 1 opposed.
Nobody is opposed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I misheard you. It's a unanimous vote. The draft that we have approved is the one that is adding a section 6.4.7, non-accessory signs. It is
It's this one right here. Make sure Toby and I'll give him a copy of it. Yeah, that's right, absolutely. If I said no to something free, I didn't understand the question.
And under the category is uses and conforming with ordinances, which we've discussed in the public hearing. So there's nothing that has not been already publicly discussed in this document. This is the draft that we had asked Crystal to return to us tonight, that we are recommending to the full body to approve at the next meeting.
I did have one question for the requester. Is the city council business friendly?
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Gary.
uh,
All right, Madam Chair,
well,
we just gotta keep rolling.
Yep, we have to keep rolling, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Toby.
November
Oh.
21st.
Good question. As of the moment, 21st of
November
November.
21st.
Unless we
Because
call,
the election was canceled, unless I call a special.
Well,
Okay.
that's the next one scheduled. So,
Yep. Officially the 21st, though.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you, Gary.
so we're back to regular order. I see Superintendent McManus here.
We got some,
We have many items. We're
okay.
so let's
rolling along in normal order.
bring Michael along then.
Yeah,
so we
Mike
can
can
help
come
him
in,
along.
patiently waiting.
We could probably take these all up as a package, right, or no?
Sure.
Motion to suspend the rules to take up all the DPW-related orders as a
Second.
package.
5 through.
All in
Which
favor?
5 through what, Kevin?
5 through 17.
Okay, then just abbreviated reading too, so we don't have to. You have to take a hike now.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for your patience, Mike.
Look at the rain coming down.
Everything or?
It's amazing. Is there a bathroom in the building open even?
Downstairs.
Says
That
out of
one's
order,
out of order,
DPW.
And it has a big ladder in it. Maybe it's because the ladder is still in there.
Oh, okay. So the toilet works, right? Yeah, all right.
Oh, okay. We weren't sure.
Well, we're gonna test that in a minute. I don't know, we'll find out, because I needed to go, actually. All right.
Okay, so we have all the items 5 through 14 through 17 before us, Mike. So the first order is around limited no parking for delivery truck access at 42 Shawmut Ave.
And, you know, we wouldn't have any problem with that in the proposed language. for adding a loading zone
Okay.
is provided below.
Do you want him to run through them all and then you want to vote, or you want to vote as we go? Might as well.
No, let's just run through them all.
All right.
Item 6, there could be some discussion, and then there's one item about Hillside Avenue, making it a one-way street.
Oh, that was removed from the agenda at the request of the maker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess it was a,
So you want to just punch through these, or?
Other than item 7, I think we could actually get the recommendation of the DPW director and then have more of a discussion on that item number 7 at the end.
And 6, too, possibly.
yes, and item 7 and item 19 go together. I think you need an updated, there were changes made to the agenda on Friday. Only the elimination of that one, I think, affected you. And if there's anything else that did, we can just leave it on the table. Okay, so item 6, you want to skip over for now?
No, I think, well, item 6 we can talk about. It's something that we've kind of alluded to at other ordinance committee meetings.
Right.
Where there is a statute in the state where you can have a 25 mile per hour speed limit in densely, thickly settled or business districts. And you can either have it citywide, or you can identify specific areas in the city. So I think there's a number of municipalities who've adopted this citywide, and one example I saw was Leominster. I think that's how you
Leominster, yep.
Leominster.
and they adopted it for one street. For it's about a couple hundred feet of this one street where this special speed limit would apply.
It doesn't necessarily have to be applied in that way. We could do something that's more broad for the residential streets
You could.
and just say residential streets, right?
Uh,
Or high-density
Well,
areas,
yeah,
however.
the Mass General Law specifically says thickly settled or business
Thickly
districts.
settled.
So thickly settled has a specific definition, and
So would
well, it wouldn't include like Afremont Highway,
you, or county road?
entire city. Yeah.
So what is your recommendation relative to this?
So thickly settled, it's where houses or businesses are situated such distances the average is less than 200 feet between them for a distance of a quarter mile or more. My recommendation is that we have a statutory speed limit of 30 miles per hour right now for thickly settled residential and business districts. We have a perception of speeding in those areas. When we look at what the actual speed is, we see that it's generally a little bit higher. It could be 35, 36, but it's not really enough that would warrant doing traffic calming measures. If we did something like this, then when people are traveling 35 miles per hour on a side street, now they're going 10 miles per hour over the statutory speed limit, then traffic calming would come into effect.
And so if we adopt this, we can still go street by street? We wouldn't have to apply it to the entire city, or would we?
You would have to adopt it on a street by street.
So we could do that?
You could do that.
So we could adopt it on a street by street basis?
Can we do that anyways?
Well,
Sure, you can make
Well-
any street you want 25.
well, But we've run into
Well,
issues with
not
that.
really.
You can't,
You
because I've
can't,
tried.
like Appermont Highway.
Right, and,
So
or,
in order to say the speed limit on Appermont Highway is 25 miles per hour, you would have to have the police come out and do a speed survey, and
I'm sure.
the police would determine what the safe speed of that road is
So this makes it
and
automatically
it could be
25?
higher.
Well,
in a thickly settled or business district.
Counselor Bartley?
so why don't we just say any street that's eligible to be changed to 25, we'll make it 25. Is that
There is some
simple?
concern
Well,
that.
what about Northampton
Wait,
Street?
wait, wait, wait.
About it,
There's some concern there.
25.
Hang on, guys.
There's some concern that by doing this, you could be putting more of a burden on the police, and that there could be, in certain areas of the police, enforcing this rule unjustly in certain areas of the city and not other areas of the city, that it could be used for profiling.
Who said that?
Really?
It's just talk.
Okay.
It could be a tool that's not used fairly.
Well, I suppose that could be true of any tool, but Counselor Bartley?
It's been profiled.
That's why I'm wearing the yellow shirt, the banana
Caution.
shirt.
Caution.
Never trust a man in a yellow shirt.
Caution.
The caution light, exactly. Well, do you want to do it, Mike, the hard way? Do you want to have a whole list of streets that are eligible and have us go comb through them one at a time? Or do you just want to do it the simple way and just have it be a blanket? I mean, I don't see, how is this controversial to lower the speed limit to 25 miles per hour? Well, maybe it is controversial, but
I think it's very controversial, but
I can't even imagine, but that's me. Whatever.
Okay.
I would,
Some streets,
Counselor McGivern?
I would prefer we get our public safety officers in from the police department to complement what Mike is saying. Not about Northampton Street, Mike, but just about speed in general and enforcement. There are streets that we should have 25 miles per hour. I think we all know that. But there are streets that 30 is perfectly safe. Why are we punishing people that go 30 miles an hour because some people go 35 and 40? That is what we've done in the city over and over and over again. The common sense is, let's get the good person that's doing and obeying the law, and you know, don't put them on the spot by changing the law to 25. You know, it's 40 is too, in any thickly settled street, 40 miles an hour is too fast. Northampton Street coming into the city is 50, goes down to 40 almost to Lincoln Street, then it goes down to 30. And it doesn't pick up until it gets into West Springfield, back up to 40. But Beach Street, which is Route 202, we made that 25 miles an hour 30 years ago, but we synchronized the lights. And that's what makes Beach Street work, is because people know if they go 25, they're only going to get one red light, you know, and they're going to get all the ways to the bridge and get over into Ward 8 and South Hadley. But 30 miles an hour up South Street, uphill, is not a problem. Downhill, it is a problem. Because when you go downhill, going 30, it's a lot harder to stop. But to say every street in the city should be 25 miles an hour is not being fair to people who follow the speed limit. 30 is safe. Mike just said the reason we're doing this is because people are doing 35 and the police can't enforce it. Why are we punishing the people that are obeying the law?
I just think that's totally backwards, frankly. I mean, because we get, this is a constant complaints we get all the time about speeding, so,
I have Counselor
I mean,
Lisi.
maybe you don't
Thank
get the calls, Counselor, but I do.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. I filed this order because I was getting constituent phone calls about speeding in a number of areas. But I think that there's two things that I'm thinking after hearing all this. So, number one, I like the simplicity of just saying 25 miles per hour on thickly settled areas. However, if that's going to create the opportunity to then create traffic calming measures, such as like speed bumps and stop signs, I'm not sure if I want to see more of that type of clutter. So, you know, if we're using the 25 miles per hour to get people down to 30 on their own because that's the speed limit, if we bring it to 25, people are going to do 5 above the speed limit, that's fine. But I don't want to get into a situation where we're creating traffic calming measures for really what's 5 over the current speed limit, which is probably appropriate if people were obeying the law. Does that make sense? Like, I'm trying to get us to 30, and so 25 to 30, that makes sense. Make it neat and clean, but to start putting up signs all over the place as traffic calming measures to get people down to 25 that's not what I had hoped to come out of the order. So do you mind talking a little bit about what traffic calming measures may look like to just help me understand that better?
Sure. Traffic calming measures would be things like speed humps. It would be road diets where you would narrow the road to make it more uncomfortable for a driver to drive fast. It would be neck downs, things like raising crosswalks, where as you're driving and there's a crosswalk, the crosswalk is like a speed hump.
Yeah, Route 5 through Northampton these days.
Northampton. Stop signs are not traffic calming measures. There's studies that show that stop signs cause people to speed because they try to make up the time lost at the stop sign, and the same thing for speed bumps. Because of the design of speed bumps where you have to slow down to a safer speed than a speed hump, there's the tendency to speed up immediately after a speed bump. Speed humps and road diets, that's what we would use. And speed humps are generally easier to construct than road diets because of curbs. Also, you might have seen where crosswalks are, that the road kind of, or the sidewalk comes out into the road.
Yep,
to shorten the distance of the crosswalk, but also to kind of make a bottleneck to slow traffic down.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Jordan?
The only thing I'm going to comment, because I guess we're taking these one by one, is on that piece of it is like certain streets like Northampton Street, for example, that would be thickly settled by that definition, I would think. And 25 seems awfully slow for Route 5, in my opinion, to be automatically 25 miles an hour on Northampton Street, which I think is 30 currently, right?
Correct.
So I guess my point is, where appropriate, let's do 25, but where it's not appropriate, let's not do 25 is my only point. I think 25 going down Northampton Street would just be way too slow, and for that matter, probably Cherry Street too, right? Cherry Street is thickly settled. You're coming up.
County Road is even 35.
Yeah.
Jarvis.
So Jarvis Avenue, 30 seems like a pretty good sweet spot for those, and it's like 25. I think the problem we've got is the ne'er-do-wells that are going 40 plus. Those are the people that are causing us the problem. But going to 25 ain't gonna make that any better.
They're not
And
gonna slow
reality
down,
is,
yeah.
you can't really put traffic calming measures only to a certain extent on Northampton Street and Jarvis Avenue. I mean, you're gonna start putting in speed humps and all these things down Northampton. I don't know if you can. There's probably too much traffic on those.
Right.
So this all works great for all the side streets, but I'm not sure about the main roads. That's a pretty broad definition of quote-unquote thickly settled,
Counselor McGivern?
I don't want to be backwards, but what Councilor Lisi just said was, we want to go to 25, so people are going to be going 30. That's about speeding tickets, because a cop isn't going to give you a speeding ticket when you're 5 miles over the limit 9 out of 10 times. When there's a serious accident, and the team comes in and measures the braking of a car, and something happens, and you're going 30 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone, you're going to get hammered. So again, why are we protecting 30? In certain areas, 30 is too fast, I agree. But we got to do it case by case. But in certain areas, 30 is not too fast. And if we make it 25, we're putting the person that's obeying the 30-mile-an-hour limit in jeopardy.
Could we pass the 25 but make exceptions to certain streets?
I believe so.
Maybe that's the happy medium.
Well, my question was, if we adopted it, could we adopt it just on a street-by-street basis instead of citywide?
Which we have the ability to do that.
So to me, that would be the answer, and then the people where the street has the issue bring it in, and we do it that way.
So what does that mean then, Linda? If we pass this, does Northampton Street automatically, I just want to understand what I'm voting on. If I vote
I'm not
yes.
sure. Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure about Northampton Street. And then the state also recommends placing signage. You know, you're entering into a
Thickly settled,
25-mile-per-hour speed limit. So if it's
Okay.
on a citywide basis, it's easier to put them at the entry points into the city, and then you're covered.
Okay, here's where I'm coming from. Picture Clayton Road and the cut through to Sunset, Ashley, and all that. They're saying people are screaming through there, it's a danger, da-da-da. But when we've gone through the speed study on some streets, if the average speed was over 30 and no accidents occurred, then it's deemed that you can't lower it to 25, based on the speed study, right?
Right, and that's...
So, from my perspective, if we adopt this law, it would give us the ability to make a congested area like that where people are cutting through all the time, 25, but I don't want to do it for every city street. I mean, I take Joe's point on that. But I would like to be able to do it for a neighborhood like that that is really suffering,
So why don't we just do
where
that?
right now we can't do it necessarily. I mean, we might be able to do it, but we might not be able to do it.
Well, I mean, the point I was trying to make
Partly, yeah.
is that I said where applicable.
Right. That
Okay,
would be
so-
street by street. Right?
I think you mentioned Appermont Highway,
Right.
Northampton Street.
Right, you wouldn't
I mean,
do it.
We're Jarvis, okay, so Mike knows, so, I mean, we're not gonna go through these street by street, are we? I mean, that's not our role, we're just gonna, this 25 for the
Only
city.
400 streets, we could finish that
Yeah,
before the
sure,
end of the night.
let's do that, and
Have you got time, right?
let's get the public safety officials in here, let's get the public safty, then let's
How
have
about you make up a list?
seven more
and
meetings
let
on
us
it.
know? We could do
I
that.
mean, you know, it's a good order, the way it is. It gets the job done. It shows that we're actually listening to the constituents for a change. There's a minimal amount of signage. We leave some discretion to the DPW superintendent/city engineer, and we don't have to have 14 meetings with public safety officials about, you know, whether 30 miles an hour on South Street going up or 25 going down. What's that about? So, I mean, sort it out, Mike. I mean, that's your job, but let's give you the tool to do it. So I make a motion, we approve it.
Is that how this would work?
You mean
If we
with public...
adopt this, is how Counselor Bartley just described it, how it would work?
If we were to do a street-by-street type
And you could
thing.
have that discretion?
Yeah, and we
Okay.
come back to the body and,
Right, and so then if I get a call like Clayton Road, instead of having to do a speed study, you can go out and go, yup, it's thickly settled, yeah, 25, right?
right,
Whereas right now, you gotta go through all these hoops.
correct.
See, I like it.
I mean, Jarvis, no. I mean, Cherry, no. Northampton
Right.
Street, no.
Counselor Lisi?
Well, how are those
for-
excluded?
For
Mr. McManus.
Northampton Street, for example, that is at 40 miles per hour, and Jarvis, Appermont Highway, et cetera, are they affected, I'm sorry, are they currently governed by the statutory speed limit?
There is a statutory speed limit for all roads, and it depends on their usage class. So
So-
something like a Appermont Highway could be considered an undivided way outside of a thickly settled or business district, in which case
And then
the
same
speed
for
limit-
Northampton Street, right?
I mean, you have to see where Northampton Street is thickly settled. Where are all the buildings 200 feet apart for a certain distance, and where it'd be thickly settled,
But if
that's
it,
where it's 30. But if it's Northampton Street, near Northampton, then no, that's not thickly settled.
But, so if I understand your description of opting into MGL C90, Section 17C, it says that this legislation only affects streets that are currently governed by a statutory speed limit.
Correct, because if we look at a street like Bemis has had a
10 mile an hour.
a police speed study done, and there is in the Code of Ordinances actual speed limits for different parts of Bemis. And there's a number of roads in Holyoke where there's a regulatory speed limit.
So then this legislation just drops all the 30 miles unmarked down to 25.
Unmarked. Correct.
So if Northampton Street is marked 30, it stays 30,
Correct.
If it's marked.
Correct.
and you'll put up signs if.
Well, Mike, but Northampton Street where it's 30 is because it's thickly settled, not because we passed a separate ordinance. Because it's 40.
No, well, I would need to
Yeah.
check the Code of Ordinances. There might have been a speed study that was done specifically for Northampton Street that determined the speed limit in this section of Northampton Street is 30, this section is 40. In which case, it's a regulatory speed limit. It's not a statutory speed limit. So, the difference between the two is that a legitimate speed study was done. It was submitted to the state approved it, and they said that's what the speed limit is for this road.
But
That's a
I agree,
regulatory.
I understand.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
you have to check case by case, but just because a 30-mile-an-hour sign is up doesn't mean a study was done.
That's true.
Well, especially because on Northampton Street, it changes so frequently that the sign may be up just because it is statutory, but they need to delineate where it becomes statutory as opposed to regulatory.
Where we had the people on Pine Street wanted us to put up a sign to say 25, and we couldn't because it was 30.
Right. So I'm kind of back full circle because I first understood that if we adopted it so that all the streets would be 25, you at your discretion could determine which ones should be 25, that they wouldn't all have to be 25.
No, this is replacing 30. If we adopt this, it replaces the 30. And anything that's thickly settled unless it has a regulatory speed limit.
Right, but somewhere along the discussion, I understood there were two different ways of adopting it, that it would be all, or it could be discretionary street by street.
We do it either way. That's why we're,
So
Not street by street. We can do it by district, or we can do it all.
See, I would be in favor of adopting it, but street by street, and leave the discretion either to requests coming from the constituents or to DPW, instead of making them all 25. To your point, because
Yeah.
they don't all
So-
need to be 25.
So municipalities that opt into section 193 can either be on a citywide basis in the thickly settled, or on a street-by-street basis.
See, I would like to adopt it on a street by street basis, rather
so
than
that, so we
every
need a
street.
list of streets.
But we don't have to tell you the streets now if we adopt it street by street. We can do the streets at any time, can't we?
That's correct.
Right, so we don't have to sit here and come up with 400 streets. We just have to adopt it street by street, so we don't have to go through all these speed studies.
Yeah.
But at some point, you will have to vote on the 400 streets. I mean, and it could just be, and it could just be, we come up with a street-by-street
3
basis.
terms from now, you should be done.
And in the first round, there's 800 streets that are on the list, and you just say yes, and then
Yeah.
from there on, then it's like, oh, we forgot about Clayton. Let's throw Clayton on the list, and it'll go in a schedule in the back of.
That seems all right.
I have the information I need to vote.
So actually,
everybody
I
have-
think at this point, we could just vote to opt in without delineating any street at the 25 mile an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Does somebody want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we adopt item number 6.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose a no.
You know,
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you can follow order and then just.
So,
Sounds like a feather in a whirlwind to me, and when in doubt, I keep things the same.
I would just like to do it street by street.
Yep, progress, yes. Okay, so we took care of 5, we took care of 6 on his agenda, we're up to 7. Around
We
the,
probably should have voted on 5. We should take
make a motion to
action on
adopt
5.
item 5 on his agenda.
All in favor?
I,
7 on his agenda, Counselor Lisi, what was your thoughts?
So, that was on the crosswalk near Homestead Ave near Holyoke Community College, Mike, item 7. He's got it on his sheet here, right?
So there's another conversation that Councilor Bartley's initiated with HCC at this intersection to take a larger look at that signal and try to refine the timing and the operation of the signal. And I think a signalized crosswalk this would be a good place for it. And I think we can kind of roll that into our conversation with HCC.
So should we table it for now, pending outcome of the discussion?
yeah.
Do you
let's-
have, there's no solid recommendation at this point to
More information
do
needed?
anything?
Well, you need a budget for this. You need an engineering study, you need an estimate, so
Right.
there's all sorts of things that have to happen.
Make a motion item 7 be tabled.
Second,
All in favor?
I.
Table until when?
You
When would you-
tell
when
us.
would you
What
like?
do you think?
Yeah, you want to come back in 2 months, Mike?
That'd be great.
2
Okay.
months?
2 months.
2 months.
December.
Okay. Item 8, filed by Counselor Jordan, that no parking be established on the southerly side of Belvedere between Hillside and Alto from December 15th through March 15th.
So we can definitely do that. I remember there was conversation last year about doing this in other areas of the city as well for winter parking. So it's a good way to try to jumpstart conversations with the fire department and with police and with residents to do that. And we do our best job at DPW to clear the roads as much as we can. But there's always parking issues and, there's always going to be complaints. And even if we do this, I don't think I could guarantee that there wouldn't be any complaints that the road's still not wide enough.
Possibly.
But it's feasible and we could do it.
Yeah, and it's just a safety issue. On these hills, my concern is that if you got 2 big banks of snow on each side, and on this particular one, you got a lot of cars coming in and out of there, and if you have 2 big banks of snow and then 2 sets of cars, forget it. You're down. Yeah, those hills. First of all, I want to compliment the DPW on the job you guys do on Raymond Avenue, Belvedere, Brookline. Those are, as you know, extremely steep hills. And narrow as it is, and literally, if you guys don't salt them, people just don't get home. And now you're sleeping in your car. It's the one downside to the neighborhood is the winter. And thank God for the job you guys do, because you literally allow people to make it home. And I know sometimes it'll snow at 4 in the afternoon or whatever time, and you guys are doing a fantastic job on that and doing the plowing, really been very, very diligent, and I hope that will continue. I'm sure it will. But these are the type of things that
Madam Chair?
if you don't have it really cleaned, there's a very narrow path, and it's very dangerous. So I make
Counselor Bartley?
No, these are important, so I just wanted to see if the counselor wants to sort of expand those dates from December 1 to April 1, so that will just be one comment. And second of all, I don't know if it's out of order but I filed an order that, we didn't make the committee, but it's in the jacket for something very similar to this as a constituent request for the corner of Fenton and Homestead. And it's almost like the exact same thing to have a parking ban on the north corner of Fenton from Homestead Avenue to, Homestead Avenue, I guess would be east for, 100 feet or whatever. That's kind of where the, so would it be out of order to sort of take that now, or is that not, you can't do it because it's not on the
I don't know
agenda?
if we can pull it out of the jacket
I
properly
mean,
or
it's
not.
You can get it into legal form, we could
We
pass
could
it.
take it up at city council, pull it out. We could pull
Well,
it
well,
out
I guess
at the
my-
city council.
Yeah, it's such a similar order to this.
Yeah.
And if Mike
Yeah.
had the time to look at it,
Yeah,
I mean, this
but
is-
then we could pull it out at the city council meeting.
And do it for
So
the
if
next-
you've got it on your radar, Mike, then.
Yeah.
If you remind me when I'm doing the report, at city council meeting?
oh, I certainly will.
I'll do it, yeah.
If Mike has the legal form
And you got till
prepared.
November 21st, is
Yeah.
likely our next council meeting anyways.
Well, that
So you're
was
saying Fenton?
Fenton, yeah. So I might have filed it last meeting. I don't remember now.
All right.
And,
So if in conversations with the fire department or police department, there are other roads that they identified as should be on this list, would it be okay to add those?
Please.
Yeah, why not? And then my other point if I may, Madam Chair?
Yes.
To the council president. So the dates I was thinking, Kevin, was December 1st to April 1st.
I definitely, the December 1st, I think is probably a good idea. April, I don't know, with the last couple of weeks of March, is there a lot of snow? I don't know.
Depends. It
Yeah,
depends.
so maybe March 31st then, yeah, is probably not a bad idea then.
So
Okay.
that's an amend.
So December 1
motion
to March
amend.
31,
So 2 weeks
So that
after
was
the
a motion
parade.
to amend.
2 weeks each way.
Second.
After the parade.
All in
that's-
favor
All
of the
right.
amendment?
Aye.
Okay, is there a motion on the order as amended?
Motion
Yes.
to,
To adopt
adopt
as amended.
Is there a second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Item 9, establish and post a no left turn at Ashley and 202. This is a safety issue.
So yeah, we can put a no left turn sign, but this will push traffic to other places, either Sunset
Yeah, it's
or
a
Pinchin.
nightmare up there right now,
Yeah.
but
Would
the
this be an
nightmare
improvement?
is only becoming worse,
Yeah.
Make a motion be adopted.
I think, and if it creates another problem, we're gonna have to do something else.
Sure.
Because everybody's complaining now.
Motion to be adopted.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. And I do hear what you're saying, but I'm
Because
just
people are
waiting for
gonna
the
have to get
three-car crash
Yeah.
with the people coming around the right, taking a left out of there, but, thank you. Item 10, that speed bumps be installed every 500 feet on Hillside Avenue from Cherry Street to Woods Ave.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the difference between speed bumps and speed humps, and I would prefer to do speed humps.
Yeah, and I
speed
think
bumps.
that's probably what he means.
Okay. And then I did a little bit of digging in 2012. There was a speed study done on Hillside Ave that showed the 85th percentile was at 40 miles per hour. So traffic calming would be recommended. We could put speed humps every 500 feet on Hillside Ave. There'd be about 7 of them going from Cherry to Woods.
Now, do you need a petition to do that, even though it's indicated, because of the way our ordinance is?
Because of the way the ordinance is, yeah.
Okay, so it is indicated, but he then has to go back to the neighbors and get the petition, 2/3 of the,
To agree, yeah.
Right. And that's going to be.
Counselor Jordan?
Yeah, being my ward, this is going to be the rub. We have, Howie lives there, right? And of course, I travel that road multiple times every day, as does my family. Is there more speeding than we would like? Definitely. There's stop signs all over the place, up and down the street.
Right.
Why those don't work as much as they should, who knows? Speed humps, I suppose, physically would do the trick. The flip side of it is, to imagine we're gonna drive now over 7 speed humps each direction, I think is a bit much. And I'll be surprised if the neighbors sign up for 7 speed humps.
right, so.
And then the question is, where would the speed, I would want a whole public hearing on that
There
to
has
say,
to
where's the speed?
required.
Right, where's the speed hump gonna go? Because as soon as you say, yeah, maybe a speed hump, like 1 or 2, and then there's the, oh, did you know it would be 7 speed humps? Oh, well, I'm not for that. And then they'll say, well, where exactly will they be located? Oh, well, one of them's gonna be right next to your driveway. I'm totally opposed to that. And then once you start getting into the nuances of all this, and you'd have to lay out a map and all that good stuff, and how do those work with the stop signs that are already there, and blah, 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 blah. I mean,
But that's why we have the petition.
yeah, so I think I don't know, I mean, I guess we will just say order complied with,
Yes.
you got the information.
That's what I'm noting, and
How
need
we
a
would have to
petition.
pursue that with all the neighbors.
And the petition has to cover 300 feet where the people want it to be.
Right.
So
That's
the people
quite a
that
radius of
want it
people.
Where we decide it's supposed to be, where the engineers decide it's supposed to be.
Right.
Well, right, so in order to do the petition, though,
But
they're
if
not
he
gonna
wants
go
it,
out, huh?
if he wants it every 500 feet, and the petition's 300 feet from the
Right.
speed hump, that's the entire road.
Yeah,
Right,
that's where you get the seven speed humps.
right, and then but in order to determine the 2/3, you have to know the 300 feet around each one.
What about,
That's the thing.
what ab-
It's a geometry lesson as well.
7 different public hearings. Speed hump A, speed hump B.
But it would be good to do them all at once.
what about if you do, I don't know how many you have, but maybe temporarily, and people will get a feel, and then they're gonna say, we don't want them.
We do have the temporaries, we have 2 temporaries.
Because
I'm sure there's a
Only have
long
2.
list.
I don't
Oh,
believe
there's
you.
a list a mile long for
I don't
those.
believe you.
There's a list, but they're hard to install because they're labor intensive and the demands on DPW personnel, it's just,
Yeah. So, a motion that this is complied with would be in
Second.
order, and a
Second.
communication to the maker that petitions are needed.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Item 11, that we remove the no parking to corner sign on the north side of John Street. We're usually asking him to.
No, you forgot, he would like to make a section of Hillside one way in addition to everything.
No,
That
that
was
was the
removed,
old
yeah.
agenda that was updated.
So my
The
num-
maker
my
asked for that
numbering's
to
off.
be removed.
Oh, okay, so that has gone, so
That item is now,
we
the
should
Bartley
give that
order.
leave to withdraw then.
No, it was not on the final agenda.
so Ryan.
So
Ryan
hold on,
sent
he
out a
had it
pub-
removed from the
Ryan-
agenda.
Ryan sent.
So it's just
Ryan-
sitting in the jacket?
Ryan sent out an initial draft agenda.
Correct.
I communicated to him that the maker of that order wanted it to be held. He did not want it on the agenda, so he took it off. The final agenda did not include that item,
Okay.
so it's properly in the jacket.
Can I make a motion to pull it out and give it denied?
No,
'Cause-
because it's not before us,
Well, neither is Fenton Street no parking.
and we didn't take an action on that either.
But assuming that we will, why can't we remove it from committee and just?
Because the maker of the order requested me to keep it in the jacket, so I'm honoring his request.
No, I appreciate that. It's just, we now know what's gonna happen to it, right?
Well, right, but we know a lot of things
All right.
about things
Okay,
that are in
as
the
long as we're-
jacket.
All right, that's fine. Whatever. Okay, moving right along.
We can see the future.
Yes.
Okay,
crystal
so
ball
item
is
11,
clear.
that the city remove the no parking to corner sign on the north side of John Street. This was
Okay.
Counselor Bartley's.
Yeah, I like it. It's just an okay. That's an easy one.
Make a motion to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We like those.
Then somebody will want it back. right
Incidentally,
after you take it down.
since we're talking about signs, I have a handicap spot that was adopted on Dwight Street in front of that barber shop, MD
What, are
Beauty
we riffing
Salon.
now?
That sign was adopted like 5 months ago. It's still never gone up. Could you just put that on
Item
your,
12.
when we're doing new signs?
That no parking be established and signs placed on both sides of Sunset near the 202 end of the street, near house number 10. Item 12, well, actually 13, as you did it.
Is it just house number 10?
Well, it's at that end of the street.
So I tried to look at the road, and it kind of curves as it comes into Westfield Road. So I was saying 100 feet south of Westfield Road, no parking.
Probably that would be good, because what will probably happen is when it's in front of that house, they'll go in front of the other house.
It'll just
And
get
then he'll
put-
be calling me.
It'll just get pushed back. The parking will get pushed back
Yeah.
on Sunset.
This is
But
what
yeah.
they're requesting.
Yeah, we can put up a no parking here to corner kind of sign.
Yeah, or just those little no parking ones like we have on Homestead.
I mean, is
Will
it,
that suffice? All right, if that suffices, that's fine. We'll see how that works.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item
14.
13. That speed limit on Bemis be reduced from 30 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour.
All right, let's get the police in here, let's get the public safety officials in here, let's think about this for about a month and a
And
half.
item
let's-
14 is
and
the
let's
same.
let's have the westbound way be one way rate, and the eastbound way be another speed limit. and
So
all
that one's to 20.
do that.
What say you?
No, I want to do that. Where's Joe? Joe, where'd you go? Oh, he left.
so Bemis already has one of those speed studies done by the police.
Yeah.
It's in the Code of Ordinances where it has special speed regulations for different parts of Bemis. So if there's concern that it's still not safe, the recommendation would be to have this police come back out and take a look at it again.
Now, he filed this in August.
So you want,
Hadn't we just done something on Bemis?
should we table and refer it to the police?
I guess. All right.
Motion to table, refer a copy to the police department for their thoughts and guidance.
All in favor?
And to the public safety committee that I just heard it for the first time ever tonight.
Second.
Item 14, because the regulatory speed limit on Lawler Street is 30, that the police department conduct a speed study to determine if it should be 25.
Did this one, does the old 15 go by too? No parking loading zone?
Oh, wait a minute, did I skip over
No,
something?
that's in there.
Yeah. Mr. Roman's order.
That's in there. I didn't have number 14.
Which one, Lawler Street or
Lawler
loading?
Street.
We don't have a,
You didn't have that,
No, that wasn't in the draft,
but you had loading zone?
but I had loading zone.
Okay. Which is my item 15, so.
what do you want to do? What do you want to do with Jim's order, though?
Well,
With-
would Lawler Street be covered by the
I think it would.
thickly settled?
I
We'll
think it
see
would.
what the city council does. Why don't we table it?
Why don't we
See
give
what
it-
the
why don't-
council
why don't
does.
we give it?
Motion to table.
Leave to withdraw.
Well, we don't
Motion
know
to
what the
give it-
Or
council's
order
gonna
complied
do.
with. Do it or complied with.
All right,
Let's do a motion do order complied with.
all right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, okay. Due to the
Complied
other
with.
item we recommended. Gotcha. Okay, so item 15, Council Roman, is the loading zone parking spot. Be created at 305 Main. And that,
Yeah, that,
You can do it?
we could do that. We
Yeah?
can convert an
Motion to be
existing-
adopted.
Second.
all in favor?
All right.
Item 16, that the city remove handicap parking 27 to 29 John
Motion to
Street.
adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Item 17, order that a sign slow with wheelchair symbol be posted near 513 Whitney
Motion
Ave
to adopt.
Apartments.
Second.
You said okay.
Progress.
All in favor?
All right.
Okay.
Why is the council going to be controversial on the 25 speed limit? I don't understand the mentality there.
As long as it's certain streets that aren't.
That's what he's going to do,
Why
Kevin.
don't we all ride in buggies too? You know?
That's what he's going to do.
Horse and buggy. All right.
Okay,
This-
we're done with
we're almost done.
18. Are we, have we,
Can Mike go home?
I'm sorry? Oh.
Can Mr. McManus go home?
I'm looking to see if there's anything else, because I had intended that the Leahy order, which was just like the Lisi order, be on this agenda also, so we didn't have to deal with it twice, but I don't see it.
So Mike can go home?
I think
Thanks.
I
so.
think that's it for DPW stuff.
Thank you very much, Mike, for your patience tonight.
Oh, unless he had anything, actually, one thing, Mike, before you run off. Are you in conjunction with the law department on the one about our panhandling signs and our locations?
Okay.
So we can vote on that at our next meeting?
City council. Okay.
Great, because
So
we already passed it.
We're
so
up
it's
to item
them.
19.
Okay, great. Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
And Mike, 72 Hitchcock Street. Yes. Thank you. And 20. Thank you.
Was item 20 for him, the Adopt the Island thing, or is that all set? No, okay, that's
Oh.
fine. We're good. Yep, thanks. See you,
Item
Mike.
19,
Save your
I need a motion.
no vote at 25 miles an hour.
We're just going to end up tabling it anyway, but
Just keep it.
19.
Keep it
Can I have a
tabled.
motion? Or just,
Leave it on the table.
okay, 20, do you have anything, Counselor Lopez, on that? Do you want to leave that on the table for now? Okay. 21, we have language on that in front of us.
Yep, motion to take that off the table.
Do I have a second?
Yep.
All in favor? Aye. We have some language on
Just to
ethics.
pass
This is
off.
the Jourdain Order, creating and adopting a new comprehensive ethics. Did you already get it? Yeah. Okay, you got it, Dave? I have right now. Okay.
Wow. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're still in the digestion,
Yes.
full digestion, like Thanksgiving stage. We're not ready. And then,
We're in the carnivorian lethargy
yes,
stage right about now.
absolutely. This is like a very large meal. Yeah, we're getting there.
Right,
And then, I'd like, again, the only thing I would like to add to this is, to take 2-335, which is to add that into this
-335.
of the ordinances.
The towing one.
Well, it's technically anybody who has a exempt from competitive bidding campaign finance rule.
Yeah.
So, I want to incorporate that here. Emergency alert.
Flash flood.
Flash flood in Ward 5.
In case you were sleeping.
I actually just got one too, except mine's just on
He had
vibrate, so,
muted his phone.
yeah.
Okay, so we have this before us.
So I would like to incorporate, 2-335, add that to the draft, and expand it to be not just any municipal contract with a value. I think in the procurement ordinance, we said any contract with a value over 40,000 or something in that ballpark. So, any contract with a value greater than $40,000, would have this added to the ethics ordinance, which is basically gonna be, the insurance contracts, the legal contracts, if they're of a big enough value, and then, towing, all of those, and add those in to, just sort of expand on all that. So I'd like to add that to the draft for the next meeting, and then
So-
we can have more discussion, I guess.
I didn't read it very closely, but I had a question around enforcement.
Okay?
You know, because lots of times, we feel good, we make another law, we put it in the really huge ordinance book that
Yep.
half of us don't know what half of the laws in there are. And then we say, oh, good, we did that. But then we turn around 2 years later and we find out we might as well not have passed it because the same thing's happening that was happening before we passed it.
Well, I'm assuming we're gonna talk about that in a minute, in the next, on item number
Well,
whatever,
right,
24
but
here.
to that point, because we updated and closed the loophole, for example, on residency requirements for fire employees.
Yep,
I worked on that with you.
yes, you did.
We did it, and what difference did it make? Zero, from what we can tell.
Correct.
So when we are crafting these ordinances, how are we going to enforce them? And they're meaningless if they're not enforced.
You have to put tough enforceable penalties in place here, and It's a great question. It's what you're contemplating. Here's the other problem. What do you do when you have the situation that it's the executive department that's making the violation? Who's going to police them? And I think what you need to think about is actions about 10 taxpayer lawsuits, some of these different things that come into play in this, which was this other city's ordinance, that you can, take actions against these officials to impose different penalties and giving citizens rights of standing in court to file lawsuits against the community where people are violating these things. You basically have a private attorney general situation where people are going to have to take up causes of action against their own city when they don't enforce their own laws.
Well, right, and I mean,
It's problematic.
when we circle back to that whole $45,000 question, where a private corporation, a private contract, yes, but public, allowed to be kept private like a private corporation, we never really resolved that.
Which one was that now?
The 45,000 payout that was redacted,
Oh,
and so we never got the answer to the questions that we were asking, because it was seen as a private contract, and so.
well,
some of these
we
things
actually did
just-
come up with a good solution there to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah,
Which, again, was another thing that had to be adopted over a mayoral veto. It seems like every good government measure here so far, he is opposed. Quite frankly, he's part of the problem, not the solution, as best as I can tell so far. Only by his own choice, not because he's some bad person, but it just seems like he never is on board for any of this good government stuff, whether it's lawyers that work for the city have to only work for the city and not have other jobs taking up their time, during the middle of a whole day. And, silly as it is, you have all these type of rules we've had to pass. And one of the examples is the one you point out. So we had to pass an ordinance that says now no transfers into salary lines unless it has our permission. And, all the years we've been in government here, we never had to do that. But we had to do it because they're coming up with ways to make end runs around the rules. I swear to God, if people would just follow these basic rules, we wouldn't have these problems. But I swear, I think people are really scratching their chin thinking of, there's this rule, how can we get around it? And then sell it. And that's really problematic. It is really problematic. So we'll have to continue this as we get into, yes, enforcement is going to be and continue to be a big issue
okay.
as to what, but your point is well taken.
Councilor
But just
Bartley?
along the same line, the enforcement, sometimes when we have the political signs,
We have a law on that.
I mean, how?
6 square feet, unless it's your headquarters.
Right, so we have enormous political signs at bottom of Linden Street, we have one at Cherry and Northampton Street, we have large political signs on the gas station at the top of High Street.
One on the building across from
And these are various
McDonald's.
candidates, these are not just the executive, although the executive is, and on the building on Maple Street that's been up there for 6 years.
Billboard.
So I think we should file.
And so
an order to
I
get
don't
them removed.
understand who, is it the building commissioner? Is it the Department of Public Works?
Building
I
department.
mean,
Building department is supposed to enforce?
and so, and then what's the consequence to the elected official for allowing this to perpetuate?
Well, so far for the last 2 to 3 years,
So,
nothing.
well, I mean, and can we impose a consequence? I mean, I don't know if we can, but, you would think there'd be some kind of,
But again, it's an ordinance with no enforcement.
well, I mean, you would think there'd be some kind of self-awareness at a certain stage after 4, 5, 6 years. Geez, my sign's been up there this whole time, and it's an
sure
even
there's
number year.
awareness.
Should I have a political sign up that's beyond 6 square feet? Should I do
Some
that?
people just don't care, though. They don't
Right.
care about
Of course,
this.
I gotta, I'm just gonna go on for 2 more seconds. A letter in the mail about how the candidate has saved the stabilization fund for all these years.
Oh, right.
When in fact,
It was
well, when in
us.
fact, I think most of us can agree that that same candidate has never once put $1 into it, that the stock market's risen for the last 5 years and interest has gone up. And in fact, that same candidate has asked to tap that stabilization fund for operating and for capital expense. That exact same candidate. But the gall, and now it's in writing.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to me that, I mean, there's never going to be the self-awareness. So it comes to the mean city councilors to impose something. So maybe we have to do it.
I guess. I think so. So is it your pleasure to table this for consolidation of the
I would
language
ask
and for us
that-
to review it?
I would ask the law department, I would make a motion to expand the draft to include, incorporate 2-335 language into the ethics ordinance draft, and expand it to include those contracts, any city contract that has a value greater than $40,000 per year.
Anything from anybody else? So
Is there a second to my motion?
we need a second on the amendment,
To amend the draft.
to amend the draft. All in favor?
Aye.
And then we'll take it up in 2 weeks, right? If you could just add that to the draft, and we'll keep chugging away.
So all in favor?
Aye.
And then the people will have an opportunity to read.
Right.
And anybody's welcome to read 2-335. I actually brought a copy tonight.
I don't see any applicants here. I didn't see any earlier. I would have taken them up before now. I believe so. I mean,
There would be Ryan, right?
who?
I just want to double check. Can you read the number?
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry,
Item
who?
22 is a vendor license for New Esters Races.
Yeah, but who is the petitioner? Do you have a name?
Oh,
or-
hang on. I'll have to look in,
I just want to get a name and a number, if you don't mind.
not at all. Okay, that's the other one. Here's this one.
Okay, let me see. This one.
And Jeanette Vega for the other one, which is Main Street. Hers is just an extension.
And she was here before us.
She's already licensed, and she just wants an extension until June 30th. I don't, does she even have to come before us to just do an extension if they already came before us and got the license?
Probably not.
I would think we could just act on that. We tabled it 10-10, but it's just for an extension.
Would like an extension, so hold on.
Here,
What is she doing again?
hang on.
She's gonna be operating over the winter?
So, mobile food, April 13th through June 30th of 2018. It's a food truck, 227 West Franklin Street. She just wants an extension. Oh, but wait a minute. This already goes through June 30th of 2018. Oh, for the permit.
Now she wants the
She's
license to
looking
park it on the
for
street.
us to have ours match, I guess. See, because that's what she has for the mobile food permit. And
She's sitting out there in the winter?
I'm not familiar with
I
it.
can swing by and ask.
Yeah?
I mean, she's on Main Street.
Yeah.
Why don't you ask her, then
Yeah.
the next meeting we can take it up?
Yeah,
If
so
she's still
she-
good at the moment.
Yeah, so she's asking until June.
Are
She good until?
She's currently,
December
31st.
31st
She wants a
of this year.
A 6-month extension.
So so we can leave that on the table if you want.
Yeah, yeah.
On both of them. The other one is different though, right?
Yeah, this person is looking for agricultural products, fruits, vegetables, honey, meat, They, Mike McManus denied the request for a mobile road occupancy permit because he says, it's my opinion there is not an applicable permit in the DPW that offers for your intention of a mobile farmer's market. A typical street vendor permit, a road occupancy permit, is for vendors who occupy a stationary location for the day, which doesn't apply to your situation. Please consider this letter as compliance with the application requirements of the city council. So they're looking to have she's actually looking to have a farmer's market.
Yeah.
It's like a mobile farmer's market of a
I'm
bunch
going
of
to
different.
approve, whatever, I'm going to support Mike's letter, so motion to deny that one.
Well, I think what Mike's saying, without looking at what's there, is that because they're going to be mobile and not stationary, they may not need the license to permit them to be on public property at a particular location because they are going to be moving.
But where do they want to be? I mean, we're approving a location.
And it's for one location, it's not,
That's all we do.
It's on down Main Street. Let me find out.
Okay. All right, we'll leave them on the table.
all right, no harm in keeping it tabled, right?
All right. All right, so I'll accept a motion on item 24 unless you want to leave.
No, take it off the table because we have to have some procedural discussion.
All right, so there's a motion,
And to
second.
remove from the table.
All in favor?
Yeah, aye.
Item 24, Counselor Jordan, that Mayor, Procurement Officer, Law Department come in and representatives from Red's Towing and Hampshire Towing appear before the City Council to discuss campaign donations made to Mayor Alex Morse during the period January 1st through September 8th, 2017, which appear to be in violation of Ordinance 2-335 and appear to be a material breach of their contracts with the city. A discussion of how this matter can be remedied should also take place.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. First is I want to talk about the law department's legal opinion, because that's going to be the impetus to how we go into this. But I just want to give some context. Context is to say that when we passed 2-335 last year, which I should say for the record was something that we gave a lot of discussion. This was part of the Hoyle procurement ordinance. We went on we must have talked about this for 6 months. And we worked very diligently with the law department. Kara worked on all the drafts. They ultimately signed off on all this. There was a very thorough discussion about everything that what had happened in the past, happened in the past. But when we passed this ordinance, this was going to be the deal. No more donations from these individuals. And there was a lot of discussion about what to do with people exempt from competitive bidding. So the towing contractors were very emphatic about not wanting to be subjected to competitive bidding. The original proposal actually had them subject to competitive bidding. Ultimately, it was decided by the committee that we would not, that the best approach was how can we make this more fair, but yet honor their wishes. So, and those of basically, it didn't sound like the mayor wanted them as well subjected to competitive bidding. So the view was at the time that we were going to create an advertising requirement and a posting requirement that at least anybody could, while it wouldn't be a competitive bid, there would be at least a posting, and people, if they wanted to, could solicit the mayor, say, I'm from tow company X and I would like to be part of the tow contract. So at least there's even aware that there's an opportunity. So that went in. The second one was to say that, look, there's been concerns raised. There's also been a change in the state law that allows now to go from $500 to $1,000 of donations. And now we've observed over particularly the last, at that time, 2 years, now 3 years, we've observed a lot of campaign donations being made by the towing operators to the chief executive. And since this is not subjected to competitive bidding, as the ordinance very clearly spells out, and let me read the language, the city council hereby finds that there is a broad concern raised by ordinary citizens over the ability of businesses and individual donors to potentially influence governmental decisions by making substantial campaign contributions to elected officials with the specific goal of obtaining favorable treatment in the award of city contracts that are exempt from a competitive bidding process. In the interest of good government, the City Council desires to establish a policy that will provide the public with notice and avoid the perception of improper influence in local elections. The City Council finds that it is appropriate to enact reasonable restrictions on campaign donations from certain persons or entities who seek certain contracts as set forth herein. Well, yeah, right? So the point is that, as crystal clear as it states right there in the ordinance, we wanted to make sure that these donations stopped. This was discussed unquestionably. The language said that certain of the disclosure rules and different things of that nature would not be for those contracts that were entered in before the adoption of this ordinance. But clearly the provision that speaks to no contract. Let me read this section. A contractor shall not make any contribution to any incumbent or to any candidate for elected office of the City of Hoyoke for the next 4 calendar years following the award of this item or for the duration of the term of any contract, whichever is longer. Okay. If a contract is awarded, it shall be a material breach of the terms of the contract where a contractor, which is a party to such a contract, made any contribution in violation of this division, and the contract shall be rescinded. It also contemplated that no contract could be renewed, extended, or materially amended unless the resulting renewal, extension, or amendment would be allowable under the provisions of this division as if it were an initial contract. Point is, we made no grandfathering of anything. We didn't say that if your contract started before we passed this ordinance, then you're not subject to any of the provisions except those provisions that we specifically carved out. We did make a carve out on the disclosure rules for pre-existing contracts. And it says, and there's also there's a prohibition on awarding contractors with certain contributors, and that's in section E1. No contribution made prior to the effective date of this division shall be deemed to give rise to a violation or penalty under this division. So obviously the ordinance clearly contemplates contributions made after the date of this establishment of this, because the ordinance clearly says those that come before are not to be deemed. Well, obviously the ones that were after are. Here's the other thing. In basic contract law, if a legal or regulatory authority with jurisdiction, as we are, makes a law that changes the rights or obligations of the party, one party could say, you know what, I don't want to play under those rules and we're going to void the contract. Or the law is what the law is. We can pass any law relative to procurement, no different than the state legislature, and no one can contract to do something that is illegal. However, what was made for contributions in the past, they were made in the past, but with those that are made now, you cannot do that. This ordinance specifically precludes anybody holding one of these contracts from making a donation to any candidate or incumbent for any of the articulated offices, one of which is included is the mayor, the other included is the city council. Period. Now, let me also say, Hampshire Towing, wonderful company. Red's Towing, wonderful company. Have no issues with them whatsoever. As a matter of fact, not only is this good for good government, but this ordinance was designed to preclude and actually to their benefit not have to make any donations to anybody. So that's a savings to them, okay? Those guys do a great job. I'm glad they're the towing companies. I have no issues with them being the towing company. Wonderful for them, okay? That's the mayor's decision and prerogative. The point is, we want to make sure that nobody could ever say it's because they gave X amount of dollars to the mayor. That's why they were selected, okay? We've already are well aware, and in the context of this ordinance, we're also well aware one of the towing operators who was dropped from the rotation, has made the very specific and public allegation that because he doesn't make campaign contributions to the mayor is why he was dropped. This is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid the even appearance of impropriety. And when you get to the point where people are making donations in the excess of tens of thousands of dollars, when you add up all these years of donations, and then somebody says, oh, come right in, I wonder if, whether that is the influence or not, it certainly appears to be the influence. And you're subjecting the community to that kind of thing. The point is, we don't want those kind of dollars attached to city contracts. And the mayor should be picking people based on merit, and these companies should just be doing their work based on merit. And they're both two wonderfully fine companies. No problem with them doing the job that they do. So,
We're back to enforcement.
we're back to enforcement. Didn't think this was going to be an issue, but when I got the campaign finance report that was filed, and it's filed with the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, as the mayors are now in Massachusetts, I had an opportunity to read numerous donations that were made by executives of Hampshire Towing and executives of Reds Towing. So, cumulatively between the three of them, those two companies, they made $3,000 in donations on between June 12th and September 8th of this year.
How much was that again?
$3,000. Interestingly enough, all of them made the donations on June 12th and September 8th, both companies. Why that days? I don't know. Maybe it was a party for the mayor. Who knows? Perhaps. I can only guess. It's not really relevant. Nevertheless, those donations occurred. That is clearly a breach of this ordinance, in my view. And so, I have October 17th, I file this order, we're going to have a conversation. Nobody wants to come to tonight's meeting. Mayor says, oh, well, the law department addressed it, I'm all set. Procurement officer, she can't make it. Others, who knows, I'll let them speak for themselves. We get a legal opinion, the date of the meeting. Now, let me also just say, as a general rule, I don't know who requested this meeting, this legal opinion. I'll let Crystal address that. But point one is, legal opinions are only issued when we request them. That's number one. We had a conversation about requesting legal opinions because I would have liked to discuss it. But nevertheless, I would be interested to know, and I'll ask when we get to questions about this question, has there been any prior legal opinions raised by the mayor on this issue? I would like to know that, because to me, the ordinance is clear, and I'm wondering at what point was all of this contemplated? Because I take note of a point made in the legal opinion, which is only 3 paragraphs. It says, contracts with both Reds Towing and Hampshire Towing were executed on October 7, 2016. It's interesting, that fact, because that tells me those contracts were executed while this ordinance was under contemplation, adoption, and in the process of was being vetoed and ricocheting back. So it almost says to me, somebody was trying to get these contracts in before the wire. I don't know if they contemplated this legal opinion or what, but I think that's just an interesting factoid. We'll just leave that, let it speak for itself. October 7, 2016. Ordinance in question was enacted on November 7, 2016. That's true. After contracts were executed. As such, contracts would not have been subject to the ordinance, and I'm going to want Crystal, if she could come up to explain that. And Section E2 of the ordinance would suggest that it can't apply retroactively to contracts executed prior to its existence. I want to see where she's getting that. We're not looking for retroactive application. We're looking for prospective application. E2, I think E1 answers the question of retrospective versus prospective. E3 is the operative document that precludes the actions that the people are making these donations. It then says, so we'll just talk about that for a minute, because the mayor is basically trying to sidestep the whole issue, hanging his hat on this legal opinion. In further response to the order submitted, any return of campaign donations is outside of the purview of the city's enforcement capabilities. Well, I'll agree with one point, and that is the ordinance allows a person to make a refund to avoid an infraction. However, the penalty is in fact not the forced return of campaign contributions. The penalty provision is it's a material breach of the contract and the contract is rescinded. That's the penalty. And as far as your enforcement question, that goes into it. So I have forwarded this to the procurement officer, my concern. I received, just for the record, 0 response. I have received no official response from Lori Belanger, Chief Procurement Officer, Holyoke, Massachusetts. No response.
Got a nice big raise.
Apparently it wasn't big enough. So I did not get a response. So I did not get any response other than getting this at the last council meeting, which I appreciate if that's the opinion, but I want to go through this because I want to understand the thinking. I have definitely a different opinion. I want to also go back to, I find it extremely, just from nothing else, extremely disconcerting that the law department is basically taking the rug out from its own work of 1 year ago when we painstakingly went through this with Caracunia to write exactly an ordinance that doesn't have this situation. And we think it was a really well thought out and great thing. As a matter of fact, it was so well done and so tight and so buttoned down, the mayor vetoed it because he even said to me, it's hard for me not to take this personal. Like, we're taking his money away. So that's how attached he is to this campaign cash he's receiving to people that are receiving city contracts. So we want to preclude this exact occurrence from occurring. It's going on anyways. And why don't you pick it up there, Crystal? I respect your opinion. I'd like to get into it with you a little bit on the who, what, where of your opinion, the thinking of the law department, considering that the law department signed off on this ordinance as to legal form and its intentions were clear at the time, and pick it up there from your side. And basically, I also think I wanted to ask if you could address is, to your knowledge, has the law department rendered a legal opinion to the mayor or anybody else on this ordinance prior to October 17, 2017?
To my knowledge, no, there was no other legal opinion written.
Okay.
To reference your comment regarding legal opinions coming to council, we do advise council, so a legal opinion doesn't necessarily have to be asked for. Because at some point, I may have to defend council for what you do, so I have to advise you ahead of time as well. So legal opinions may not be asked for. So that's where that comes from.
So just in fairness, I know it's a procedural point, but I know you guys were overwhelmed about individual counselors just asking for legal opinions. You said you wanted those to come from the body. However, on the other hand, you'll give us legal opinions even when we don't request them. So I know.
Overwhelmed as to time, we don't want any idea that there's favoritism happening behind the scenes. So you asked for one and I give it to you immediately because maybe there's nothing on my plate, but somebody else says, oh, she never gave me a response. That was more of where that was coming from.
Okay.
So
Okay.
as a
Enough
body,
said. Enough said on that.
it makes more sense.
It's not that important. Okay, great.
So as a fellow attorney, you understand that interpretation of laws can be taken a million different ways.
Sure, sure.
So my interpretation of this was that it went to more of when a contract was being contemplated, that this ordinance would come into effect. The language suggests such under a few sections. Under Section D, mandatory disclosure for contracts. Before the city may enter into a contract with any person as defined herein, the person would complete a mandatory disclosure form with the purchasing department. There's another section, a certification by the contractor that if awarded the contract, the contractor and anyone attributed to the contract as defined above shall not make any contribution to any calendar year to any individual, etc. No contract shall be awarded to any person who has made a total contribution of more than $200. It just all looks to be prior to a contract forming. That was my interpretation of it. a concern that came up in reviewing this ordinance, which we're starting to kind of review a lot of ordinances. I think a lot of it's outdated, some of it needs to be rewritten, just a change of hands, a different view on some of these. There's some concerns about the fact that controlling campaign donations could be a problem. So not necessarily as part of a contract agreement, but in this ordinance, the way it's written, you control any donations 4 years after the agreement of a contract. Campaign donations are said to be a form of free speech. They're protected. So there's some concern there about whether or not that control can actually happen. I don't know what the remedy there is. I'm not sure how to reword it. That would take some more digging, but I know in part of the discussion in our office,
We discussed this at the time last year.
I'm sure. But I also know in dealing with counsel that even though we sign off to legal forms, some of it may not be the way we think it should be. It's, as a body, it's decided, and as much as we can sit and say, no, don't do that, sometimes it still comes through. So without looking back into old files and to find out how that discussion went, or looking at old tapes, I couldn't tell you. It was before my time. But that's where some of that thinking came from with this legal opinion.
Okay. I will say that good people can disagree, so I'm just going to start with that. However, the plain and ordinary reading of a statute, whenever you're doing statutory interpretation, would lead one to read the statement that says, "A contractor shall not make any contribution to any incumbent or to any candidate for elective office of the city of Hoyoke for the next 4 calendar years following the award of an item or for the duration of the term of any contract, whichever is later." I think any judge would read that to be the Jourdain interpretation. Maybe I'm wrong, but that says to me, no donation. What we have here are donations that are in violation of that, in my opinion. As far as the issue, I'll just say you're correct. The great famous case of, thank you, that's what I was about to say, Citizens United, Supreme Court of the United States says campaign donations equal to political speech, corporations can even make donations, blah, 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 trickles down. Okay. Of course, the scope of that decision was federal elections. However, that's in the abstract. Where it's a condition that the applicant is agreeing to as a condition of operating in the city of Hoyoke, as these are the laws. And it's reasonable restrictions, just like the OCPF in the state legislature has said you can only donate $1,000. Well, is that a restriction on my free speech? Because I want to give $1 million to the candidate I love, right? Everything has these restrictions on it. So what we're saying is, you're getting a benefit. You're getting a contract not subject to competitive bidding. So what we're saying is 2 things. One, because you're not subject, and basically someone can just say, here's a contract worth $250,000, which is what we're talking about with the towing contract. Here's $250,000. 2 things you have to do. You have to advertise it to everybody. It's not bid, it's just who the mayor likes. That's a pretty powerful thing. He can basically just hand this very lucrative contract to somebody that he likes. But we did say you at least got to advertise and post it so the world can at least say, hey, Mayor, I'm over here. I'm from the Jourdain Tow Company. At least consider me, right? So we made that a rule. We also made the second rule, which is, Mayor, you can't say, hey, I'm from the Jourdain Tow Company, and by the way, you're doing a great job for Mayor. Here's $1,000 for your campaign. Oh, and by the way, my wife's going to give you $1,000, and my son's going to give you $1,000, and everybody in my company that's an executive is going to give you $1,000. Oh, and by the way, don't let that influence your decision when you decide who gets this $250,000 contract. That's what's going on, Crystal. That's what's going on. And I want everybody to get ahead. I want, and the thing of it is what bothers me is I almost wonder if the tow people feel almost obligated that they have to make these donations. Because the reality is it's the culture. It's the culture of this building that it's pay to play. And this isn't the only city that has that, but we're a city that does have it. And I feel bad for them, and I think this helps them. I know some of them would probably say, I like to give, and I want to go, and I want to give my money to my guy, and blah, blah, blah. The reality is, it's the right thing to do, to have rules like this. The mayor has no problem raising money from a whole sundry of people. God bless him. Raise $1 million for all he wants. Just not from people with city contracts. That's the difference. Because what does that say? It says, or at least it leaves the appearance to somebody that says, gee, Joe Banana gave you $5,000, $10,000, Lord knows how much money. I've added it up. It's a lot. We're talking between Reds and Hampshire, it's a lot of money. Well in excess of $10,000 over the last couple of years. People, ordinary citizens, just as the ordinance says, could be led to believe that that had something to do with the mayor's decision. And now it subjects the city to really bad press because we got the guy up here at Reardon's now yelling in the paper saying, I didn't give money, so that's why I got dropped. Maybe not because he's a lousy company or the mayor made the right decision. Who the hell knows? I don't know what the truth is. I don't know if George Murphy's right, Alex Morse is right, I don't know. But I don't like my city dragged through the mud. And to the mayor now, he has taken campaign contributions from these donors. As you will see in this ethics ordinance, why I want to include that is donations from Ross Insurance, who holds the health insurance broker contract, from executives from Dowd Insurance. Dowd Insurance donated $5,000 to the mayor's campaign, various executives and their wives. Before they got the contract, add up the donations to Mayor Alex Morse before that. The problem with being here a long time is it's scary, but I start to put two and two together, right? I actually know what's going on. That's why at some point I have to divorce myself of all of this come January, all right? Because it makes you very cynical of the government. I first got tipped off, just so you know, me, Kevin, my little slice of the world here, I got tipped off on all of this stuff 15 years ago with Ross Insurance and that thing. I never knew about insurance broker commissions. I never knew that Ross Insurance was making $8,500 a month in brokers' fees every month. And then I always wondered, I said, boy, they really love Mike Sullivan. They donate like $6,000 a year to him, Little mom and pop kettle, that she writes a check for $100 to the mayor or $50 to the mayor, great. But these people are giving serious, heavy duty contributions. And I want to thin the herd on all that. But what Mike Sullivan did, or the donations made to him, looks like a piker compared to Alex. What the current administration, I don't want to make this just about Alex, except he's the example in front of me, has been to take that amount of campaign raising from these individuals with city contracts and blow it through the roof. Like in this last reporting period, Bresnahan Insurance, I think they have one of the city contracts. Not too much, only $450 from executives from that company. Ross Insurance, $2,600. Dowd Insurance, $5,000. When was the last time Bob Gilbert made a $1,000 contribution to Alex Morse before he had this contract? Towing, I mentioned that, $3,000. We got to consider some of these other contracts. Executive parking, it was only $500, but it was there. I asked Charles Emma. He's doing legal work for the city of Holyoke. He's made somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 in contributions. So the question is, on legal services, where is that all going? It's just when you see every member of somebody's family making a $1,000 contribution, you say to yourself, Are they getting the contract for these services because they're the best and he's a great lawyer? Or it just leads people to believe other things. I won't even get into the marijuana folks and the donations for the $3,200 after he signed the moratorium. You know, you sign a moratorium on August 10th, you get $3,200 in contributions on August 30th. This is what's going on in Holyoke. My point is, with this ordinance, this was the intent of the ordinance. This was the meaning of the ordinance. This is, to me, what the law says here. I would like somebody in the executive to sit down and do an education. I'm not trying to play gotcha. I wish that campaign finance report had said 0, because that was the intent. As a matter of fact, I spoke to one of the towing people at the time, and I said, look at it this way. You don't have to make any donations. You're going to be our towing person because you're a great towing company, and they both are great towing companies. So the question now is, where do we go from here? I would request the law department either, one, get another independent legal opinion. If we have to pay somebody $2,000 who's really a pro in reading this to give us some more guidance. Number two, I'm concerned about the fact that you're the first person to have looked at this before these donations were made, because that means they didn't even get advice before this. That means it's like, until you wrote this, why did the checks come in on June 12th and September 8th? How could they have read that and said, that don't apply to me? That's what I'd like to know. So you came out with this on October 17th. Those donations had already been made at that point. I would like to see the law department sit down with the chief executive and say, Houston, we got a problem here, and we need to knock it off. And it isn't going to be, oh, well, when the next time they do a rewrite and all that stuff. No, no, no. This is a law that affects this contract. And I'd like to talk to you more about it. We won't solve that tonight, but I want us to really think this through, because we're looking to expand this in the new about all these contracts that are of significant value.
Should that go to the city solicitor, Paul Payer?
To Paul? Sure. I'm happy to sit with Paul. I'm happy if Paul's willing to set up a meeting between Paul, you, me, and Alex. I'll have that conversation, and we can go through the nuances over a cup of coffee of all this stuff. But this is what the mayor vetoed. He knew damn well what he vetoed. He's a smart guy, and he knew this was the rules. And we talked about all this, and we didn't get, well, we'll just put it in there, but we know you can't really enforce it. There was none of that. It was, this is the rules. When this passes, these are the rules. And it was really disappointing to see these campaign donations go. And I'm forced now in a situation where we did all this work, and it's about what type of government we're going to have here in Holyoke. And we're trying to break this culture. So I don't know what you recommend for next steps. I'm willing to do whatever to say, going forward, we won't have any more. I'm willing to meet people halfway, but personally, the $3,000 should go back to these people, and end of it. He's got enough cash to, no one's going to turn off the lights at his campaign headquarters if he gives these people back their $3,000. I believe the ordinance clearly says that, and I would hope the mayor would do the right thing. He took an oath to uphold the ordinances of the city.
And I just want to chime in briefly. I received a donation in the mail from one of the towing companies. Surprisingly, I think it was at the day of the city council meeting or the day before. And I was part of crafting that ordinance. And I sent it back to him with a note. And I said, I'm like, I can't take that. And I told him, I said, because we passed this ordinance, I can't take it, and you shouldn't have given it to me. But they were involved in that discussion at the time. But, I don't expect them necessarily to know all the ordinances and laws of the city, but I guess I do expect the mayor who signs them all to know them.
I'll make a motion to table it, and I'd like to have more conversation with the law department on how we move forward.
All in favor? Aye.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.